Chapter 498. Gustav's body morphed as his muscles expanded, and he grew taller, with his skin tone turning red. Red fur grew out of his skin as well, with big fangs. He dashed forward diagonally towards Indrik's position in the midst of his transformation. Indrik, who had noticed his approach, stretched apart both hands and clasped them together with force. Gustav, who was dashing forward, halted his movement and stretched out both hands as he noticed two powerful invisible forces headed towards him from both sides. It was like two massive walls closing in on him, looking to crush him in between. Bang! A loud sound of collision rang out as Gustav stopped both invisible forces with his palms and started running forward once again while holding them in place. Indrik once again sent out another telekinetic attack towards Gustav, which he successfully destroyed. Suddenly, Gustav arrived in front of Indrik with his fist swinging in motion. Indrik tried moving towards the side to dodge Gustav's attack, but it was too fast for him. Bang! Gustav's large fist slammed into Indrik's side, sending him flying into the air once again. Forwa! Indrik felt his ribs crack as his body flew hundreds of feet backward across the air. Swan! Everyone's eyes widened as they noticed Indrik's body fly over the ledge of the battle platform and towards the red river of fire surrounding it. His body still kept flying for several hundred feet before it started plummeting towards the burning sea of flames. Dash, that was quite fast. Dash, I didn't expect the battle to be this quick. Dash, Gustav didn't even get serious yet. There are a lot of transformations he hasn't used. Dash, I guess this is the end. The spectating cadets voiced out in the background as they watched Indrik's body plummet towards the river of flames. Indrik suddenly opened his eyes, just as he was 10 feet away from making contact with the sea. Truinin. His eyes glowed up again as he spun in the air and stretched out his hand towards the surface of the river of flames. Thuum. Everyone's eyes widened as Indrik's body paused 2 feet away from making contact with the flames. His body could be seen suspended in midair. Indrik had made use of his telekinesis to create a floating board of will, which he used to suspend himself above the river of flames. He stood to his feet and stared at Gustav from his position atop the sea of flames. Gustav slowly walked towards the ledge and stared back at Indrik, who was about 500 feet away, floating above the invisible board. Indrik's eyes squinted as he stretched out his hands towards the river of flames once again. Grarhai! A weird sound reverberated across the place as everyone noticed a massive circle begin to form on the surface of the river of flames. The circle outline turned deeper and deeper and continued to spread out, causing more liquid flames to flow into it, till it covered a span of over 1,000 feet. Indrik started raising his hands. Hi-yah! He groaned out as he lifted his hands. Grarhai! The massive circle formed underneath started ascending along with the river of flames within it. It was as if a bowl was dipped in to scoop out flames. But in this case, the bowl was made of telekinetic energy and was so massive that the number of liquid flames being scooped up was bigger than the size of a building. Everyone's mouth widened as they watched the river of flames being scooped up into the air by Indrik's powerful will. Dash, just how powerful is his will for him to do that? Indrik kept groaning while raising his hand, causing the massive telekinetic bowl of liquid flames to keep rising till it was hovering above, in front of the battle platform. Everyone could feel the intense heat of the bowl of flames from their position since it was currently floating about 50 feet above the river. The massive hole created after Indrik pulled that out was slowly being filled up. Indrik gave Gustav an intent-filled glare as he swung his hand downwards with force. Fwyi! The massive bowl of flames began to descend with speed towards the platform. It would have cast a massive shadow, but it was flaming hot and burning red, so instead, the heat surrounding the platform increased as it descended. Gustav turned around and dashed away to avoid the wrath of the river of flames descending upon the platform. Swoosh! Bang! He managed to outrun it and get out of its range of collision before it slammed onto the platform. Intense heat wave spread across the vicinity along with shock ripples causing the entire platform to vibrate intensely. Gustav paused and turned around as he noticed the destructive ripple headed for him. Atomic manipulation has been activated. A 3-foot-long milky-colored blade was conjured in his hand, which he swung forward with full force. Sui. He completely cleaved the ripple in half, but the heat waves turned his skin flaming hot. Heat resistance has been activated. Gustav instantly activated heat resistance, causing the temperature of the surroundings to reduce for himself. Krryyhh. As his red skin returned to normal, he noticed the cracks that were spreading across the platform. Indrik's attack had weakened the platform significantly, and it looked as if it would split apart any minute. Gustav hadn't even gotten time to stabilize himself from the previous attack when he noticed numerous balls of liquid flames floating in midair. Zoom, 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 zoom. Thousands and thousands of them appeared in midair surrounding Gustav and Indrik. Indrik still had his arms raised slightly as he stared in Gustav's direction from up ahead. So, this is how you've decided to play it. Quite clever, Gustav said internally, while still staring at Indrik. Indrik seemed to be comfortable standing in midair, far from his reach. Fly. Before Gustav could think of a plan, the balls of liquid flames wrapped in Indrik's will began to descend heavily from every direction. Chapter 499. Before Gustav could think of a plan, the balls of liquid flames wrapped in Indrik's will began to descend heavily from every direction. Sui. Each ball of liquid flames was the size of a fist, and them shooting forward in multiple numbers made it even harder for them to be dodged. Gustav started moving from place to place as he dodged the descent of these projectiles. His body traveled in a zigzag format as he did his best to avoid those that he could. As Gustav jumped upwards to dodge a few, more of them arrived for him from above. He spun severally in midair, while stretching out his right hand with the milky-colored blade in his grasp. Multiple balls were sliced in half as his body traveled in midair. He swung the milky blade all around him with speed, clearing multiple balls of liquid flames headed towards him again. Gustav started dashing towards the front while swinging his hand out with speed. His hand movements were blurry, so fast that in a single swing, over 7 of these projectiles would be cleaved in half. Atomic disintegration was powerful enough to make parts of the liquid flames that came into contact with it disappear. While Gustav was making his way forward, Indrik kept sending out more and more of these. However, Gustav was so fast that even with the speed of these projectiles, he was able to see them in a slower motion and move in their midst while cutting them down. Indrik's plan was pretty smart. Knowing that he couldn't defeat Gustav in physical strength, he decided to stay as far away as he could while sending out long-range attacks to drain Gustav. Energy discharge has been activated. Boom. Ripple-like energy suddenly blasted forth from Gustav's being into the surroundings, clearing the projectiles headed for him. Gustav had a clear path in front of him at the moment and dashed forward properly. His body transformed once again, turning dark as he grew ram horns out of his forehead with another pair of fangs. He had added the demonic sonic bunny to his combination of transformation. Scree! Gustav opened his mouth as he arrived back at the ledge of the platform, causing sonic waves to blast out from them. Indrik quickly conjured a telekinetic barrier in front of him to block the sonic waves. Bang! A loud blasting sound rang out as he was sent flying once again along with the barrier. Gustav didn't stop. He continued on with the scream until Indrik's telekinetic barrier shattered, and the energy knocked him flying once again after directly making contact with him. Indrik felt his head throbbing immensely as the scream not only affected his body but his mind too. After blasting him across several hundred feet, Gustav's sonic scream was out of range, and he had to deactivate it. Indrik's body was still flying across the air as he spat out blood, and his eyes turned bloodshot. His ears and head were ringing badly, and he was finding it hard to see due to his vision getting blurry. As he reached the rising limit from the force of the blast, his body started descending once again. Everyone's eyes focused on his descending body, and he could see blood dripping from his figure as he fell towards the surface of the river of flames. The flames were so hot that his blood evaporated before even reaching the surface. Indrik himself had some burn marks on his skin at the point due to nearly falling into it the other time. And this time, it looked as if this was truly the end for him. I admit, you're truly more powerful than I am, big brother. But I cannot let it end here. Indrik said internally as he squinted his eyes forcefully and spread his hands. SWWWHHHHH. He once again conjured another telekinetic board and fell on it. As expected, this prevented him from falling into the river of flames. Indrik once again stood to his feet and stared at Gustav from his position far from the battle platform. He was currently over 1,000 feet away from the platform, standing in midair above the river of flames. The spectators had to acknowledge Indrik for doing this well so far. They thought it would be an easy battle for Gustav, especially since he could conjure an attack that could literally end everything in an instant. To their surprise, it wasn't quite so, and they didn't understand that Gustav couldn't use that attack in a battle like this because he would also be putting himself in harm's way. "You can't get to me from here, can you? This will be the end for you," Indrik voiced out as he stretched both hands towards the river of flames again. Everyone once again saw the outline of a circle on the surface of the river of flames. They instantly understood that Indrik was using that powerful attack again. Indrik was right. From this position, Gustav's sonic screams couldn't reach that far, but Gustav had other alternatives, unlike what Indrik thought. Gustav raised his hand, and orbs began to appear all over the place around him. Gravitational energy container bloodline has been activated. When everyone saw these orbs, they were first filled with shock, remembering the display event. The first thoughts that came to their minds were, "He can create this many?" But then they noticed that this one seemed different from the one he had used on that day. The energy orb Gustav used the other day was reddish and black in color, with purplish electric arcs swimming across its body, while the ones Gustav had just conjured were bluish and didn't look intimidating in any way. This was because Gustav conjured a normal gravitational energy container orb that was currently empty without any energy. Blue circles began to appear around Gustav's arms as flames appeared around his palm, which he began shooting into the balls. These balls started storing the energy Gustav was inputting in them while Indrik was also lifting the massive bowl of liquid flame from the pool underneath him. Chapter 500. Gustav didn't waste any time. All 57 orbs he conjured had both bluish and reddish colors at the moment as they floated further into the air. Gustav raised his hand and swung it forward like a general telling his army to go forth into battle. Indrik's eyes squinted even more as he saw the orbs charging towards him in midair. He had raised the bowl of liquid flames several feet into the air already, but it wasn't enough. Not wanting to be disturbed, he controlled his telekinetic board to move with his mind while still focusing on lifting the massive bowl of liquid flames. Zwee-wee! Zwee-wee! Indrik moved out of the way, trying to dodge the first orb. However, the moment it zoomed past him, what came next was an explosion. Boom! The impact sent Indrik flying towards the side as his will got disconnected from the massive bowl of liquid flames and began to fall back towards the river of flames. The impact of the explosion of one orb only covered a radius of around 50 feet, so it wasn't powerful enough to seriously injure Indrik. However, it disrupted his attack. Indrik quickly stabilized himself and conjured a telekinetic bubble-like barrier around him before stretching his hand in the direction of the massive, falling bowl of flames. HHHGHHH. He groaned loudly as he wrapped his will around the liquid flames to prevent them from falling back into the river underneath. The other orbs had arrived around him at the moment, and more explosions began to go off. Boom, boom, boom. The explosions slammed forcefully into Indrik's telekinetic barrier, but were unable to break through. It was shaky on the inside, but Indrik made sure to focus on lifting the massive bowl of liquid flames once again. Veins popped out on his neck and arms as he raised them up with intensity. He was determined to successfully drop this on the platform once again. Gustav's eyes squinted as he made more orbs and sent them forward with speed. They were both unrelenting. However, in the next few seconds, Indrik sensed his telekinetic bubble barrier cracking apart. The massive ball of fiery liquid was already close to 50 feet in the air, but this still wasn't enough height. Gustav swung his hand forward, sending about 30 more balls towards Indrik's position. He made them surround Indrik's barrier, covering up his vision completely. Indrik already knew that this attack would definitely cause his barrier to be destroyed, so he started activating an ability he had gained recently. Space cloning will form projection, Indrik closed his eyes as he said internally. Zoom, his vision suddenly turned completely blue while his eyes were closed, and he began to see through his closed eyes. From his line of sight, the entire environment was blue along with every living being. His line of sight zoomed in on Gustav's position thousands of feet away. It was like having a flying camera type of vision as his line of sight arrived right behind Gustav. At this point, Indrik's barrier had been completely covered by the orbs, so within it was completely dark. It was at this moment that Gustav made them detonate once again. Boom, 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 boom. Multiple explosions rang out all at once, this time destroying the barrier completely. As the energy of the explosions cleared, Indrik could be seen standing in place while closing his eyes. Gustav swung two of his fingers forward, controlling the rest of the orbs in the vicinity to move towards the defenseless Indrik. However, at this moment, Gustav suddenly sensed something behind him. He paused his attack as he tried moving out of the way, but he was too slow. SRHH. A bluish-colored dagger pieced into Gustav's left side in the process of trying to dodge. Gasp! The entire crowd was left shocked as they saw the glowing blue dagger lodged 2 inches into Gustav's side. No one witnessed how it got there. They only saw it appear in Gustav's body. How didn't it go deeper? Indrik also had a look of shock on his face as he opened his eyes. This ability takes a lot of energy. I can't waste any time. Indrik decided not to dwell on that and continued lifting the massive bowl of flames upwards. Gustav swung his hand as he turned around, but he didn't make contact with anything or anyone. The bluish glowing dagger stabbed into his body, disappeared into thin air in the next second, and blood flowed down, soaking that part of his uniform. That was quite the trick, Gustav said internally as he raised his guard and took a battle stance. Suddenly, he felt something of force from his right side. Bang! As Gustav turned to the side, he got hit before he could stop it, causing his body to slide several feet backward. Gustav's eyes squinted as he threw a kick forward, followed by a punch, and crouched down to do a leg sweep. Even with all this, he didn't make contact with anything or anyone. It was like the force that hit him could make its presence appear and disappear at will. It was so good that he wouldn't be able to sense it with his perception until it was only a centimeter away from making contact with him. God Eyes has been activated. Gustav activated God Eyes to study the wave of energy in the air and use it to uncover the movement of this unknown and invisible force. Gustav was confused because all but he could see around him were glowing bluish lights that spread across the place. Deactivated God Eyes, he couldn't see these lights, but activating them, he could see them everywhere around him. He was literally basking in the glow of these blue lights, and he couldn't shake them off. Gustav suddenly felt the strange force coming from his side again and turned around to swing forth his leg, knowing that he would still get hit since he decided to throw out his attack as well. Bang! Bang! 2 sounds of collision rang out as Gustav managed to land a hit on the strange force a moment after he got hit. Check out my new story, Chronicles of Azeroth. Add it to your library, vote, and comment. If up to 1,000 people add it to their library before next weekend, they'll do a 5 chapters mass release for the Bloodline system. Thank you all. Chapter 501. Bang! Bang! 2 sounds of collision rang out as Gustav managed to land a hit on the strange force a moment after he got hit. Fwy! He slid back by a few feet and stabilized himself with a look of surprise on his face. Aside from the stabbing earlier, all hits barely had an effect on his body. Now that he managed to hit the force responsible for these sneak attacks, Gustav sensed something. It feels like a person, Gustav said internally as he once again prepared himself for the next hit. Gustav had been studying the pattern of this strange invisible force, so he stood in place while waiting. Combination has been activated. Sprint plus dash. He suddenly activated this and combined dash and sprint, increasing his speed level multiple times. The strange force was felt again at this moment, headed for his spine area. In that split moment, Gustav turned around with immense speed and reached out. Bam! He grabbed hold of what felt like a fist and held it in place. Got you, Gustav said internally as he reached out with his left palm. Palm strike has been activated. His palm traveled forward with speed, causing ripples of breeze to scatter across the place as it slammed heavily into what seemed like a chest to Gustav, tearing through it. Gustav still kept God eyes activated. For a few moments, he noticed a bleeping body outline twitching in and out of existence. Within its chest was Gustav's left arm. Fui, in the next second, it disappeared along with all the small blue dots in the vicinity. Gustav had deactivated combination at this point. He didn't combine sprint and dash initially because of the high amount of energy it consumes. This was why he needed to use it at the precise moment when he was sure the attack of the unknown force was going to appear. So, it was like an invisible clone? How was the kid able to do that? Gustav was so surprised as this didn't make sense to him. However, there was no time to think about this at the moment because Gustav suddenly felt an immense amount of heat wave from above. He turned around and looked up, only to see the massive bowl of liquid flames hovering above the platform. The time he had spent dealing with the invisible clone allowed Indrik the chance to pull this stunt. Indrik smiled from his current position thousands of feet away as if he was saying, "I win." Pa. Snapping his finger, the massive bowl of liquid flames began to fall towards the platform once again. Fwyi. It carried so many heat waves more intense than before and cast a blazing red light upon Gustav and the platform amidst its descent. Gustav once again had to turn around with speed, charging in the other direction to leave its range. Even though he currently had heat resistance activated, which currently consumed a lot of energy, he could still feel the searing hotness of the descending mountain-sized liquid flames. Burn marks had already appeared on his skin as the hot liquid flames got closer. Boom! Gustav felt the blast of heat behind him as parts of the liquid slammed into the platform behind him, and some were close to dropping on him. Swoosh! Luckily Gustav managed to dash past the range of collision just in time. However, the shock waves mixed with immense heat still slammed into him from behind, catapulting him forward. Gustav somersaulted across the air repeatedly as his uniform caught fire from behind. Krryychh. 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 More cracks appeared all over the floating platform at this point in time. The spectators all had widened eyes as they stared at the splits on the platform increase more and more. All of a sudden, bam! A loud crumbling sound was heard as the platform split into 3 parts from the middle. Gasp! More rocks from the battle platform continue to crumble into the river of fiery hot liquid. Krryychh. It didn't look like it was over yet, as the parts that got split broke into several smaller parts as well, and some even sunk into the river of flames. The crowd was stunned as they noticed that Gustav happened to be standing on the side of the platform that only covered around a radius of 200 feet. Some of them tensed up after noticing the large cracks on the platform that seemed to be increasing even more. Gustav, at this point, already tore the upper part of his uniform once again. His entire upper body was in full display, and everyone could see the scorch marks on his back and shoulder, which indicated just how hot the liquid flames were. Gustav's back that was stabbed initially had stopped bleeding, and everyone could hardly see any signs of injury. Did he already take a healing pill? This was everyone's thoughts because they had expected this injury to incapacitate Gustav a lot, especially since it was a sneak attack. Still, here he was standing like he had received no damage whatsoever. During the battle, it was nearly impossible to take a healing pill because your opponent wouldn't even give you the chance to heal yourself. The spectators also didn't see Gustav bringing out a healing pill, so they were confused. Gustav, on the other hand, stood on his broken part of the platform with a look of intrigue. The part of the battle platform he was currently standing on was drifting further away, while the other parts in the vicinity kept crumbling into the river. Indrik was up to 6,000 feet away from Gustav's current position, still standing on his telekinetic board while staring at his small outline with a gloating look. Krryychh. Bam! Krryychh. Bam! The space on the platform Gustav found himself broke apart even more, and there were only about 50 feet more room left on it. From the looks of things, it was only a matter of time before this one sunk into the river. Chapter 502. Gustav scoffed as he closed his eyes and transformed back into his normal form to reduce the weight on the platform. 6,000 feet distance. The spectators were still watching with looks of interest, wondering why Gustav closed his eyes. Smirk. So foolish to assume I cannot get to your position just because of distance, Gustav voiced out as he opened his eyes. Super jump has been activated. Gustav suddenly squatted with speed as his calves bulged with power before leaping forward. Thum Graybu, the platform he was initially standing on, blasted into pieces as his body shot forward like an asteroid flying across space. Indrik, along with the entire crowd, had shocked looks as Gustav crossed over 4,000 feet in a matter of a few seconds. Indrik quickly activated his will again and sent a telekinetic force forward to knock Gustav down while in midair. Gustav, at this point, already had the orbs floating around himself as he traveled forward. He was only about 500 feet away from Indrik's position when he sensed the pressure coming from above. Gustav controlled the orbs to surround his feet position and detonated them in the next instant. Boom! A loud blasting sound reverberated across the place as Gustav's being was given another boost, crossing the 500 feet gap in nearly an instant. Whoosh! His figure phased through the explosion behind like a phantom as he arrived in front of Indrik, who was wide-eyed at this point. Both their eyes made contact as Indrik tried creating a telekinetic barrier in front of him as fast as he could while Gustav's right arm was already traveling forward. Gustav's arm tore straight through the telekinetic barrier before it could form and grabbed hold of Indrik's neck as he landed on the telekinetic board. Ugh! Indrik made a loud choking sound as Gustav held him up while tightening his fist around his neck. Before Indrik could react to that, Gustav's left fist was already headed for his belly. Bang! A loud sound reverberated across the place as blood shot out of Indrik's mouth the instant Gustav's fist drove into his gut. Gustav pulled his arm back again and threw another punch forward while still holding onto Indrik's neck. Bang! Indrik spat out blood again onto Gustav's face as he felt his internal organs getting pummeled. Gustav wasn't even bothered about the blood as it rolled down his face. Indrik was still choking, and he was about to throw another one when he felt the telekinetic board underneath him getting unstable. He instantly understood that dealing with Indrik would cause the telekinetic board to disappear, and both of them would fall into the river of flames below. "But I'm not done with you," Gustav muttered as he leaped off the telekinetic board with Indrik still in his grasp. He landed on a small rock in front that was floating above the river's surface of flames. Bang! He drove another fist into Indrik's chest, this time the instant he landed there before jumping off again. His body traveled several hundred feet across the air, and in the process. Bang! 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 Indrik received hits on his chest, face, gut, sides, and even ribs. Gustav was finally reaching the end of the fiery river towards the south side. He could see the rocky walls up ahead, which also extended to the top where some of the spectators were situated. At this point, Indrik's whole face was smeared with blood, along with his white uniform, which was currently blood red. He was bleeding from almost every part of his body, including parts that Gustav didn't make contact with due to the force of Gustav's attack. His strength. I can't contend. Indrik had tried to break free many times and use his abilities. However, every time he tried, he was disrupted by Gustav's attack. Every hit rocked his internal organs, making him feel immense pain. He had almost passed out at this point and was left remembering his time with Officer Mag. Gustav landed on another piece of a small rock. He leaped upwards with immense force while pushing Indrik's body forward as they closed in on the rocky wall up ahead. The spectators in that part of the hall quickly moved away in fright. Bang! The entire place trembled intensely as Indrik's body crashed into the wall, creating a massive pit. Gustav kept pushing him forward with the remaining force left from the leap, using his body to create a deeper hole within the wall and breaking through several hardened internal parts. The tremors stopped after a few seconds, and everyone stared at the hole created within the wall from their positions. Chatter, 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 chatter. The voices of the cadets could be heard in the background as they stared at the hole. Bang, 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 bang. The loud sound of someone getting hit kept reverberating from the hole. Those with great eyesight could see a little bit, while others wondered what was happening now. The instructors spectating as well all had looks of pity on their faces. How else did anyone think this would go? Indrik was smart enough to use the location to his advantage, but this was why Gustav was still known as the most powerful for a reason. They could see Indrik receiving more hits from Gustav within the hole. Indrik's eyes finally rolled to the back after vomiting a mouthful of blood once again. Gustav threw him to the floor within the dark hole one more time and stomped his head into the ground before picking up his unconscious body. He slowly walked towards the opening of the hole while pulling Indrik by the neck. Arriving at the ledge, he stretched out his hand in which Indrik was in his grasp. He stared at the river of liquid flames bubbling up beneath while holding Indrik up a few feet in front of the ledge, ready to release him into the river of flames. 1 hour ago. This pill will bring out your latent potential for 2 minutes, causing you to skip several levels. With this, you will be powerful enough to defeat even a senior class cadet, as long as you utilize that time. However, it takes 1 hour to activate after consumption, and your bloodline potential will reduce by a step after this. If you don't want this one, you can also go for other options. Indrik listened to the voice coming from the communication device in front of him as he stood in the middle of his room with a red pill in his palm. The battle ends in the, who do you think will come out on top? Chapter 503. Indrik listened to the voice coming from the communication device in front of him as he stood in the middle of his room with a red pill in his palm. I'm taking this one, Indrik voiced out in response. Are you sure? It's gonna. Before the person on the other end of the communication could complete their sentence, gulping sounds were heard in the room. Indrik had already swallowed the pill. Enhancement pills that have this kind of effect are dangerous for young mixed bloods such as yourself and also illegal, but the MBO won't be able to find out that you took such a pill. Every trace of it within you disappears the moment its activation period ends, and this one was created by our finest scientists, so the only side effect will be tap. Indrik tapped the deactivation button and closed his fist. Bang! The communication device was instantly smashed to pieces after he made that action. Enough of your yapping in my ears. It's time, Indrik voiced out with a solemn tone as he turned around to leave his room. In the Hall of Doom, Gustav still had Indrik's neck in his grasp and his arm outstretched in front of the ledge of the dark hole. Indrik's battered and unconscious body hovered around 70 above the river of flames. Gustav's fingers were slowly releasing from Indrik's neck, and just as he was about to let go of Indrik completely, phew, a strange wind suddenly started blowing across the place coming from Indrik's being. In the next instant, Shinned Indrik opened his eyes, revealing a set of blue irises and dark blue pupils that were bordering on purple. They glowed with ominous light as he stared directly into Gustav's eyes. Before the crowd could understand what was happening, a powerful force suddenly blasted out from Indrik's being. Shraboom! Gustav, who was hit at point-blank range by the blast, got sent crashing backward with intensity. The entire hall vibrated due to this blast, and even some spectators were blasted backward. The instructors quickly swooped in and protected the cadets from the energy of the blast. KRRYYHH. KRRYYHH. Lots of spectators had to move away from the ledge of the circular passageway due to some parts of the wall crumbling and falling into the river of flames. As the intensity died down, everyone stared at the position where Indrik was initially situated and found out that he was no longer there. Instead, he was about 200 feet behind, hovering above the river of flames while his eyes continued to glow the ominous light. The immense pressure coming from him at this moment caused everyone's eyes to widen as they wondered what was going on. This pressure was only felt when Gustav unleashed his most powerful attack back then in the display event, yet Indrik was emitting this same pressure without even unleashing any attack. Gustav, who was blasted backward earlier, pulled himself out of the new hole his body created after blasting into the end of the hole earlier. What was that? Gustav asked internally with a confused expression. Things just got dangerous. Indrik's energy level suddenly spiked. His current strength level is at the Echo rank. The system announced. What? How is that possible? Gustav asked internally with a tone of shock. I sensed a kind of. Before the system could complete its statement, Gustav suddenly felt a strong tug. Why? It was so powerful and instantaneous that his entire being got pulled out of the hole with speed. The instant he adjusted to what had just happened, he noticed a fist headed for his face up front. It wasn't actually headed for his face. His face was the one heading towards the incoming fist, which belonged to Indrik. Bang! A loud sound of collision rang out as Gustav was sent flying backward with his arms in an X format. Indrik, who had just performed that attack, stretched out his hand again, causing Gustav's catapulting body to halt for a moment before pulling him towards his direction again. Gustav was unable to react in time before he felt the tug on his body again and found himself traveling towards Indrik once again. Bang! Fists after fist were sent out as Indrik continuously repeatedly this action, but Gustav was able to prevent himself from getting directly hit each time. However, he was taking damage even though he was able to block the hits because each punch felt like a mountain was slamming into him, and he was unable to fight back because Indrik's will had suddenly undergone a big transformation which was letting him control Gustav as he pleased. Indrik stopped Gustav's catapulting body and swung his hand towards the side. Fwyi! Gustav repeatedly spiraled across the air before slamming into the side of a rocky wall. Bang! Indrik swung his palm again. Fwy! An invisible force crashed into Gustav's body the instant he slammed into the wall. Indrik repeated the same action. Bang! 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 The powerful force kept ramming into him, drilling him into the wall and causing it to crumble. At this point, the crowd was astonished, wondering what was happening. All this had happened in less than a minute, and it had been so quick that they could hardly follow what was happening. Gustav felt the solid invisible wall slamming into him over and over again, causing bone-cracking sounds to ring out. Blood oozed out of his mouth and nose as he quickly began to transform. Scree! He quickly shot out sonic waves from his mouth to fend off the next telekinetic attack. Bang! The collision was made as Indrik's invisible force was stopped for a few seconds, but Gustav found it extremely hard to keep it up as the force kept pushing his sonic screams backward. Gustav quickly pulled himself from the massive, rectangular hole created in the wall due to Indrik's force and leaped off it. Bang! The force crashed into his initial position and caused debris to scatter all across the place. Gustav's body that was currently in midair increased in size. Chapter 504. Size manipulation has been activated. This always helped in reducing the speed at which Indrik could wrap his will around his body. Gustav's right arm turned massive as he swung it forward with force. It continued increasing in size as it traveled towards Indrik's body up front. Bang! Gustav suddenly felt something block his massive fist the instant it was only a few feet away from slamming into Indrik. Indrik turned towards the side and stared at him. In the next instant, Gustav's massive body was swinging towards the side once again. Bang! 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 In a matter of 10 seconds, Gustav had been thrown from place to place all across the rocky walls at the edge of the fiery river over 100 times. It was as if he couldn't even fight against Indrik's will. Indrik once again reached his hand forward and pulled Gustav out of the hole in which he buried him last after tossing him across the place repeatedly with his will. Gustav felt his head spin a little as he found himself floating several 10 feet away from Indrik in midair. Indrik stretched both his hands outwards and began to separate them like he was pulling something apart. This same action led to Gustav feeling a strange force wrap around his arms and began pulling them apart. Both his arms were being pulled away from each other with force. Indrik was doing it effortlessly like he was pulling a thread. Meanwhile, Gustav felt like he was being ripped in half by the force of two mountains tied to his right and left hand. Size manipulation has been activated. Gustav quickly activated size manipulation, and instead of growing bigger in size, his body instantly shrunk. See him, his body decreased by a foot, causing him to be released from Indrik's will. Indrik was taken aback by this, and just as he wanted to grab hold of Gustav's tiny frame with his telekinesis, multiple orbs suddenly appeared around him and exploded. Boom, boom, boom. The instant this happened, Gustav increased in size once again and stretched out his hand to grab hold of the wall by the side. As the explosion cleared, Indrik couldn't be seen in the same position anymore. He had appeared several hundred feet behind. Gustav leaped forward once again with force as Indrik also sent forth his will only for Gustav to shrink in size again, confusing Indrik. Gustav appeared in front of him before unshrinking with an uppercut, traveling towards his jaw. Zing! Indrik suddenly blitzed hundreds of feet towards the side, dodging the punch. This action shocked Gustav as his fist went through thin air. Indrik swung his palm forward, sending an invisible wall towards Gustav again. Gustav shrunk once more and landed on a small rock in front before leaping upwards again. His attack on Indrik failed 3 more times due to him blitzing away like he was teleporting several times. Indrik suddenly decided he had had enough and raised his hand high up, conjuring a large invisible force above. A strange pressure suddenly blanketed a radius of 5,000 feet around them, causing fierce winds to blow across the place. The instant Indrik swung his hand down, a massive invisible palm descended with force upon the river. Gustav was caught in the middle of this and couldn't get away, so he quickly increased in size, becoming up to 1,000 feet tall, and stretched both his legs from wall to prevent himself from falling into the river as the massive invisible palm descended. Bang! Crumbling sounds reverberated across the entire environment as Gustav bore the weight of this enormous palm, which pushed down on his shoulders, causing his back to tremble. Indrik stood in place staring at him for a few moments before reaching out again and wrapping his will around Gustav. Fwyi. He raised his second hand and caused another massive invisible palm to descend upon the place. Bang! The instant it landed, Gustav lost his foot as both palms sent him crashing towards the river of flames while he decreased in size. Gasp! The entire crowd had widened eyes as they stared at Gustav falling into the river of flames. Gerpel, they couldn't believe their sights as they saw his body sink into it. Indrik finally released the pressure on the vicinity and stared at the location where Gustav fell in with a look of pity. 10 seconds left, he said internally as his eyes slowly began to dim. Dash, is it over? Dash, Gustav lost? Dash, how is this possible? The spectators all had looks of astonishment and confusion. They had witnessed what had just happened with Indrik and his sudden massive leap in strength, which made no sense to them. Dash, hey, isn't that? While everyone was arguing about what just went down, the shocked voice of a cadet brought them back to reality. Everyone seemed to have noticed the reddish-brown orb cackling with purplish electricity floating behind Indrik at the same time, and their eyes widened as they recognized this orb. Indrik turned around the instant he sensed it, and that was when, boom, it exploded with intensity. Zim! Indrik had blitzed away in the last moment, while quickly conjuring multiple barriers of telekinesis around him. The instructors in the vicinity also sprung into action at the exact same moment, using their abilities to conjure protective layers around the edges of the fiery river to protect the spectators from the blast. Boom! The bright, dark red shockwaves spread across the place, carrying immense power and pressure with it. It covered a radius of 3,000 feet in nearly an instant, obliterating everything in its path. A massive hole was being torn open within the river of flames that kept expanding as the blast also did. The walls vibrated with intensity. Meanwhile, Indrik's telekinetic barrier was being torn through layer after layer. He couldn't outrun the blast and found himself within it. He still had kept putting more up as they were consumed, because the moment he ran out of energy to conjure barriers, it would be his end. Luck, however, did not seem to be on his side as his eyes turned dim in the next second. Time up, Indrik said internally with a look of despair as he felt the energy within him shriveling up. I know I said it was going to end in this chapter. Yeah, it's took longer than I expected. It will definitely end in the Chapter 505. Time up, Indrik said internally with a look of despair as he felt the energy within him shriveling up. The telekinetic barrier surrounding him started getting ripped apart as the reddish waves of energy threatened to consume and obliterated anything in its path. Indrik tried as much as possible to keep the barriers up and create new ones while amid these destructive waves. However, in a matter of seconds, he had lost all energy within him, and he could not conjure another barrier. Boom! Kirrhhh! As the blast began to die down, A loud scream was heard from within the reddish and black waves of destruction. The spectators witnessed a human-shaped body get blasted out from within the waves towards the far south. The orb destroyed the surrounding walls and caused the barriers protecting the spectators to nearly get destroyed. Later on, the waves began to shrink down. In a few moments, it shrunk completely into a small blue dot and disappeared. Meanwhile, a massive amount of the river of flames beneath was missing. The level of the river of flames beneath had reduced by a lot, and all the rocks that were initially floating above the surface had been totally destroyed. Walls had crumbled, and the river of flames had increased in length due to the destruction of some of the barricades. Everyone wasn't really focused on this at the moment because they could see Indrik's body being blasted far towards the back. Their eyes were widened because his left arm was missing along with his right foot down to the knee area. Half his face was charred black, and blood oozed out of multiple parts of his body like a fountain. He was in such a mess that no one knew if he was conscious or not. While he was being blasted backward and close to reaching the other side of the nearly crumbled wall, a loud blast was suddenly heard from the river area again. Thuum, 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 thuum. Several long and thick-looking icicle-like spears shot out of several parts of the river below. Thuum, one directly shot out of the river, close to the location Indrik was headed for, and stabbed straight into his right shoulder from underneath, hooking him in place. Gasp! The spectators gasped as they noticed Indrik hanging up several hundred feet above the river with the icicle-like spear in his left shoulder area. Fuwu! Everyone's eyes widened again as the river of flames blasted open once again, and a pillar that looked similar to the massive icicle-like spears shot out of it with someone standing atop it. Dash! It's Gustav! Multiple shouted out at the same time. Dash! He's alive? Dash! How did he survive that? Chatter! 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 Voices of confusion broke out in the background as everyone watched Gustav rise along with the massive pillar he was standing on, which was shooting out of the river of flames underneath. Those with keen eyesight noticed that the instant his body shot out of the river of flames with the pillar, he was covered in some weird-looking layers which disappeared as he rose. Some of them already guessed that these layers were why he didn't get incinerated within the river. Still, they had no idea what it was or how thick it was to withstand the insane high temperature from the river of flames. Gustav arrived in front of Indrik, who was hanging up in the air with the icicle-like spear stabbed into his right shoulder. Gustav could see that half his face had been completely obliterated along with his left arm. Gustav was also looking a bit battered, but his eyes still shone with a fierce light. His face remained cold and unbothered, and his presence grew powerful as he slowly walked forward. The pillar that he was standing on had a large space above that covered up to 50 feet, so he had to walk forward a bit for him to be directly in front of Indrik. Step, 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 step. The entire atmosphere turned extremely tensed as they watched Gustav take his time in walking towards Indrik's elevated body. It was only about 5 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes because everyone could tell that the defining moment had arrived. Gustav stood in front of Indrik's body and stretched out his hand to place it on Indrik's jaw before slowly lifting his head to stare at his face. Black blood was rolling down his darkened face, along with specks of tears, even though his eyes were closed. Savor your last moments very well. They will be filled with pain, Gustav said before pulling Indrik further towards him, which caused the icicle-like spear to piece into his shoulder even deeper. Blurg! Indrik vomited out blood on Gustav's chest, which he ignored. Gustav arched back his left arm and drove it forward with force, punching Indrik in the gut once again. Bang! Blood splattered all across the place because, unlike last time, Indrik didn't have a telekinetic protective vest wrapped around his body anymore due to low energy. Gustav slowly pulled his fist back, covered with blood that dripped down his wrist and fell into the river of flames below. Everyone watching had looks of pity on their faces. Some couldn't even keep watching as they felt Gustav should just put Indrik out of his misery quickly instead of torturing him like this. Officer Mag was among the people that could no longer keep watching. She turned away with a crestfallen expression as the sounds from behind kept pounding away in her head, giving her an uncomfortable feeling in her gut. Bang! 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 The entire place had turned silent at this point, and all that could be heard was the sound of Gustav's fist occasionally slamming into Indrik's defenseless body. Indrik spat out blood for the umpteenth time as tears rolled down his face. "Muim, DD." He muttered weakly, causing Gustav to pause his fist that was initially driving towards Indrik's face. Chapter 506. Muim, DD. He muttered weakly, causing Gustav to pause his fist that was initially driving towards Indrik's face. "Even in this situation, you still call on the names of the people who ruined your life," Gustav voiced with a cold tone. "Hostage. I am sorry are going to die." Gustav heard Indrik mutter gibberish, causing his face to show a confused expression. "Huh. Is this supposed to be a last-ditch attempt to milk sympathy from me?" Gustav scoffed as he responded. "Not gonna work, kid," Gustav added with an unbothered expression as he prepared to finish Indrik once and for all. Indrik kept muttering gibberish, but Gustav had closed his ears to all that. He could tell that Indrik was trying to apologize for his wrongs, but it was far too late now. Gustav's right hand slowly transformed into that of the mutated bull, becoming massive and muscular. He arched his hand back with intensity while tightening his fist as he amassed energy within his entire arm. There was no way this punch wouldn't pierce straight through Indrik with what everyone had witnessed so far. Ildris, Falco, Timi, and Rhea all stared in Gustav's direction with conflicted expressions. They had already agreed with Gustav that they wouldn't butt in, so they had no choice but to watch. Fuwu. Just as Gustav drove his fist forward, a loud scream was heard. "Stop!" Fly. The wind blew across Indrik's face as Gustav's punch paused a few inches from his chest. Gustav squinted his eyes as this was a voice he recognized. He slowly turned around as he sensed a projectile headed for him from behind. Gustav raised his hand and caught the button-sized device that flew towards him from the spectators' area thousands of feet in front. As he lowered his hand after catching the device, he stared in the direction where it came from. "Angie, what is this?" He voiced out loudly after spotting Angie's frame, standing alone on the crumbled passageway in front. "Listen to it," she responded loudly as well. "This is not the time nor the place for." Before Gustav could complete his sentence, Angie screamed out again, "Please, listen to it. Now." Gustav's eyes remained squinted as he slowly lowered his head to stare at this button-sized device. He picked it up with 2 fingers and placed it on the side of his head. Truinin. The instant it glued to his head, it activated, beeping with blue light. "Dash, what is going on? Dash, what are they doing? Dash, why did he stop? Dash, is that a mind recording tape on his head?" The spectators couldn't understand what was going on right now. The instructors were just as confused with Officer Mag, who thought this was the end for Indrik already. All they could see was Gustav's face slowly changing expressions as he stood in place for the next 2 minutes. Whatever he was listening to was playing in his mind, so no one could eavesdrop or tell what was being said. After 2 minutes, he slowly pulled the device from his forehead with a conflicted expression. He gritted his teeth, a look of annoyance. "That bastard," Gustav said internally as he turned around to stare at Indrik. Gustav placed his hand on the icicle-like spear and instantly broke it in 2 before grabbing onto Indrik's nearly unconscious body before it fell off towards the river of flames below. The broken-off part of the spear was still lodged in Indrik's right shoulder, so he quickly pulled it out and placed Indrik on top of the pillar beside him. "Dash, what's going on?" This was the question ringing in everyone's mind as they witnessed Gustav bring out a healing pill from his storage device and feed it to Indrik. Indrik was nearly out of commission at this point, so he would eventually die even if Gustav didn't end him. However, this recovery pill brought him out of his nearly dead state after a few minutes. Gustav squatted in front of Indrik as he slowly opened his eyes. "Forfeit the match," Gustav instructed. "Are you not going to kill me?" Indrik asked with a weak tone. "We'll decide if you're worth staying alive on another day." Gustav responded while standing to his feet. "They're safe," he added with a mysterious tone, causing Indrik's eyes to widen in shock. Tears once again rolled down his eyes as he stared at Gustav's frame, which was currently moving towards the edge of the pillar. Why would you spare me? Indrik wondered. Hey, he wishes to forfeit, Gustav called out to one of the instructors. The entire spectators watching were stunned. They still had no idea what was going on, and Gustav's current actions made them confused even more. One of the instructors leaped towards their current position and landed right in front of Gustav. That's not how a death match works, he began explaining. Either you both battle till one person loses their lives, or both of you pass out. No one can forfeit unless you both decide to call off the battle unanimously. Gustav turned to the side to stare at Indrik, who also weakly raised his head up and nodded slightly. We're calling it off, Gustav voiced out. Do both parties agree to this? The instructor asked. Yes, both of them voiced out together. The instructor called off the death battle after this, causing a huge uproar within the Hall of Doom. You owe me a lot of explanations. I will listen to what you have to say this time, Gustav voiced out while turning to the side with a serious expression. Thumb. He leaped off the massive pillar in the next instant, arriving on the other end of the roundabout passageway. Indrik still laid atop the massive pillar with a missing arm and half a leg, but he was slowly starting to regain color. Officer Mag landed in front of him a few moments after Gustav left and took him away with her to get medical attention. Chapter 507. Officer Mag landed in front of Indrik a few moments after Gustav left and took him away with her to get medical attention. Gustav left along with the others amidst the stares of everyone in the vicinity. There was even a large crowd of cadets waiting just outside the Hall of Doom. The instant they spotted Gustav leaving, they assumed Indrik was gone, but they were quite shocked to see injuries on his body and half his uniform gone. They had heard the sounds of the vigorous battle from their positions and understood it must have been truly a crazy one. However, they never expected Gustav, who was currently number 1 on the ranking, would use so much effort to defeat Indrik, who was ranked 12th. He opened up a vortex which 5 of them entered and disappeared from everyone's sight. A few moments later, Officer Mag had Indrik in her arms as she flew out of the Hall of Doom. Chatter, chatter, chatter. This caused another round of confusion since those who had not witnessed the battle were left wondering what had gone down within the Hall of Doom and why both brothers were still alive. It would later spread across the camp that Gustav decided to spare Indrik's life at the last moment, and both brothers decided to unanimously cancel the battle. Minutes later, Gustav was within his room with Angie, Ildris, and the others. How did you get this, Angie? Gustav asked while raising the button-sized device in his hand. I got a call from one of the officers to follow her to a secluded place while you and Indrik were battling. She explained to me that there was a package from Miss Amy. According to the package that came with this recording device, Miss Amy mentioned that it was important I got this to you as soon as possible and stop the battle before any of you two died, Angie explained. I see. Looks like she made an investigation just like I asked, Gustav muttered in response, causing all of them to have a slightly confused look on their faces. A week back, when Gustav had received the information package from Miss Amy about research from the planet Humbad, she dropped the communication device. Through the device, Gustav would be able to send her a message one time. Gustav initially didn't see any need to use it at first, but then he recalled Indrik's strange changes in personality. So, he decided to ask Miss Amy to investigate if anything was happening outside related to Indrik. This was because he knew Indrik was like a pawn in someone else's hand after finding out about the function of the foreign element in his body. Gustav explained things that had happened within the MBO camp on the device and how Indrik and the formerly unknown group were under the influence of someone on the outside. He hadn't expected Miss Amy to quickly get down to the bottom of the situation in a single week and figure out what was going on. It was as if Miss Amy knew where to look into and, in a matter of days, uncovered the whole thing after linking Indrik's communication with the outside world to young Joe. She figured out the plot and managed to save Gustav's and Indrik's parents, but she was still unable to pin this to young Joe because he had totally erased any form of evidence that would lead back to him. The 2-minute message Gustav listened to back in the Hall of Doom was from Miss Amy breaking down the events to him and how Indrik was threatened with his parents' lives to accept the deathmatch. Gustav didn't even care about his parents. Neither did he really care if Indrik lived or died. But the instant he found out young Joe was involved, His entire being trembled with rage. He figured that there was truly a chance that Indrik might have changed. Although this didn't mean his grudge had disappeared. He still wanted to hear everything from Indrik's side because he understood the decision was made against his own free will. Gustav explained part of the situation to Angie, Ildris, and the rest. He didn't give them the full breakdown, but he made them understand that Indrik didn't accept to battle him of his own free will, and there was a chance that Indrik might have truly turned a new leaf. I told you, Gustav. He's still a kid. You should give him a chance, Angie stated. Doesn't change the fact that he holds enough power to burn an entire neighborhood to the ground. Just because he's a kid doesn't mean he shouldn't be held accountable for his actions, especially with the amount of power he holds, Gustav responded with a profound gaze. You're right. Angie couldn't refute his statement. I will hear what he has to say, and decide what to do next from there, Gustav added. I'm glad things turned out this way, though. He has the potential to be a great ally in the future. Voiced out from the side. That's still pending, remember? He can be made to do things against his will. I don't know what's more dangerous, him getting controlled against his will or him pretending to have changed just to put some secretive plans in motion, Gustav stated. Even though Miss Amy had explained things to him, Gustav only gave Indrik the benefit of the doubt. Trusting that he had completely changed was still impossible for Gustav at the moment. Minutes later, all of them left the room, and Gustav was left alone once again. He reminisced about today's events as he channeled his bloodline. It was certainly a crazy day, and he would have been incinerated if not for the power of the Calapisol. This was the same alien form he took back then in the Caskia ruins. The Calapisol could create a tough and solid material from its body called Iro silk. This same Iro silk stopped Gustav's atomic disintegration from cutting through back then. Chapter 508. It could change the form and state of the Iro silk to whatever it wanted, and most times, it chose to make them in the form of spears similar to icicles. All in all, it could create any size or form it desired with the Iro silk, and the Iro silk was tough enough to withstand almost anything. The temperature of the river of flames wasn't high enough to melt it, even though it was hot enough to incinerate a full-grown adult human before they made contact with its surface. Mixed bloods around Gustav level have tougher bodies, so they could last for about 3 to 5 seconds before they were incinerated completely within. Gustav had a high defense level, so he could last for way longer, but he also would eventually be consumed completely within. Gustav never used the power of the Calapisol in public view because he had to partially or totally transform into the creature before he could materialize Iro silk. Doing this in public had the risk of someone recognizing the transformation to be that of an alien form, and right now, no one knew he could take on alien forms. Everyone thought his transformation ability was only based on mixed breeds. If alien forms were added to the mix of revealed information, Gustav could tell that it would cause an adverse effect. After falling into the river of volcanic flames when battling Indrik, Gustav instantly took the form of the Calapisol while sinking into it. After doing that, he wrapped his body in layers of Iro silk before he was completely incinerated within. He had already set a trap for Indrik earlier by placing the gravitational energy container orb filled with mixed energy right behind him. It was impossible to notice this due to the orb hiding within a type of gravitational field that only Gustav could see. It only revealed itself when it was ready to explode. Gustav waited at the bottom of the river of flames till he heard and sensed the explosion. His perception within the river of flames was at a high level, so the moment he sensed Indrik being blasted across the place, he conjured spear-like Iro silks, shooting them out of the river towards Indrik's catapulting body. He missed 3 times due to speed but finally got the 4th one, and this was his cue to leave the river of flames. Even though the Iro silk was very sturdy, there was no way it wouldn't erode with time. He shot upwards by conjuring a massive pillar of Iro silk which he stood atop. All this was what led to the scene where he nearly killed Indrik. It had been a very crazy battle, and Gustav was still intrigued about the whole Indrik powering up and the ability he used to delay him by conjuring an invisible clone from thousands of feet away. Gustav decided to put all this off for now since Indrik would come clean to him soon. He decided to keep focusing on channeling his bloodline for now. He would be leaving camp in a few days anyway. Just like that, 3 days went by. During the last 3 days, the hype from the battle between Gustav and Indrik still hadn't settled. Cadets were still going crazy about the whole situation, and some began to compare Indrik to the top 5 cadets on the ranking, saying, since Gustav could have a tough time, there's a possibility that Indrik might win against the other 4. This speculation had sparked debates all across the camp, and even though everyone admitted that Gustav was the undisputed number 1, Indrik was not a special class cadet to be trifled with. His potential outranked every single cadet on camp regardless of year. During the last 2 days, Gustav had excused himself from any camp-related activities since he was training for his first mission. He was allowed to do as he pleased during this period, so anyone hardly saw him. Today, he finally came out of his room after 3 whole days of secluded bloodline channeling without taking a wink of sleep. He had decided to meet with Vera before meeting with Indrik today to confirm some things. They met in one of the camp gardens and sat on a chair placed in front of one of the trees. What is the situation now? Gustav asked. My parasitic strains have turned dormant after the battle for supremacy. Vera responded with a low tone. What? Does that mean you won't be able to take control of him? Gustav asked. Vera nodded in response. What of the other foreign element within? Gustav asked. It also turned dormant. Both seem to have cancelled each other out after the battle within him. Vera answered. This is both good and bad. He won't be controlled by young Joe, but I also won't be able to gain control of him. I cannot trust him to act of his own free will, Gustav muttered with a troubled expression. Can you infect him with more parasitic strains? Gustav suddenly asked after a few seconds of silence. He will die if I do that, Vera stated, causing Gustav to go back to his pondering state. Maybe he has changed. You should try giving him a chance, Vera added. Gustav thought about it for a few seconds before sighing. All right, let's see how things go, Gustav said before standing to his feet. Make sure you keep watching over his internal structure and report any change you notice, Gustav instructed before dashing off. Swoosh! Vera's hair blew upwards due to the wind generated from Gustav's speed, as she continued staring in his direction even after he had left. Bye. They'll miss you, Vera muttered sadly. In about 2 minutes, Gustav was dashing towards the top of a massive icy top mountain. He arrived at its top in a blink of an eye, where Indrik could be seen waiting for him. Fool! He paused his steps after arriving a few feet in front of Indrik. Half of Indrik's face was wrapped in bandages, and his left arm was back in place, but also wrapped with bandages and strapped to his neck with a kind of rope-like bandage as well. His right foot had also been regrown, but he was still using a walking stick to support himself. Gustav stared at him with an expressionless look as usual, as if he didn't have a hand in Indrik's current state. I'm listening. Chapter 509. Gustav stared at him with an expressionless look as usual, as if he didn't have a hand in Indrik's current state. I'm listening. Gustav stated. Indrik repeatedly stuttered, trying to make out his first words. Gustav was quite surprised to see Indrik looking tense for the first time. The kid always had a cocky expression, but this time he was genuinely tensed. Indrik lowered his head and let go of his walking stick, causing him to stagger forward. Gustav muttered as he watched Indrik get closer to him. Plop. Indrik dropped to his knees right in front of Gustav with his head lowered. I know and understand the wrongs I have committed now. I was the worst. I truly hated and despised you for being weak. Father and mother made me think and believe, just like everyone else, that your existence was a useless one. I always got so angry when I saw you making the news, and rumors about you being very powerful were spread back then. I couldn't handle that you, who was labeled as weak and useless, was becoming better than me. I thought it was okay to feel that way. I thought it was okay to despise weakness. I thought it was okay to look down on everyone and treat others however I felt. Miss Mag helped me see the error of my ways. Indrik's voice was laced with heartfelt regret as he spoke. I know it would be hard to forgive my wrongdoings, but I just want you to give me the chance to make amends. Indrik added while still keeping his head down. Hard? Borderline impossible, Gustav said while squatting in front of Indrik. Not only did you do a lot of experimentation using me as your human subject to test out your abilities, you also tried killing me months back. Actually, we tried killing each other, but you came for me first, and you'd be dead by now if it wasn't for Angie, Gustav said with an icy tone. Indrik gulped down saliva as he heard that and continued looking down with a disturbed expression. She saved your life twice now. Be grateful to her, he added. Indrik was about to speak again when Gustav cut him off. Skip all this bullshit. They'll never be able to trust or accept you. Even if you spent years working to show me that you have changed, it cannot change what you have done in the past, Gustav voiced out. Did you think you could just come here and mutter the words "I have changed," and then I'll accept you as my little brother? Nah, kid. It's not that simple. Left to me, those two you call Mom and Dad would be dead by now because they deserve to be in such a scenario. You're lucky Miss Amy decided to rescue them, Gustav added before standing back to his feet. Indrik remained in position, kneeling with his head down. I know you can no longer see them as your parents and I as your little brother, but I will still do my best to change your view of me. I will try, Everett. Indrik was still in the process of speaking when Gustav interrupted him again. Don't bother. Gustav cut him short and turned around, facing his back to the kneeling Indrik. Anyways, this is not why I called you here. Tell me everything about your partnership with young Joe, Gustav instructed. And I mean everything. Don't leave any detail out, he added with a cold tone. Indrik finally raised his head up to stare at Gustav's back before he began to narrate his ordeal with young Joe. Gustav's facial expressions became complex as he listened to Indrik's narration about the events that went down 5 months earlier. He wasn't told about the whole secluded punishment, so now that he was finding out, he saw the MBO methods as pretty blunt. What made it worse was the fact that young Joe could visit there anytime he wanted. Gustav started to re-evaluate young Joe, wondering just how much influence he held within the MBO. Miss Amy would most likely not be able to do something like this so covertly, even though she was just as influential. She was not affiliated with the MBO like she used to. Whereas young Joe went to many meetings for his father and handled most of their company decisions on technology. From the narration of things, it seemed like young Joe's influence had eaten deep into the MBO without the knowledge of the higher-ups. This felt extremely suspicious to Gustav as he recalled young Joe wanted to recruit him under his wing, making some crazy promises about getting him to the top of the MBO. As Indrik got to the part of the deal about him getting fooled by the nanites young Joe planted, things clicked for Gustav. Young Joe had proven that he could take control of Indrik's body against his will if he wanted. Still, he promised that it would only happen if Indrik disobeyed any of his commands after his training ended in the MBO. So Indrik felt their contract was still in play even though the nanites were within him. Young Joe stated that they were undetectable, so Indrik shouldn't try playing smart. He also mentioned that there were other pawns that he could use for his convenience within the camp for any plans that he might have. Now that Indrik thought of it, he couldn't understand why young Joe just didn't make use of the nanites to control his body when he disagreed with battling Gustav. He wondered why he had to resort to kidnapping both parents. Indrik also mentioned that there were more officers in camp under young Joe's control and cadets as well that he didn't know of. I see. Seeing as he couldn't get me, he decided to get you to get me instead. Looks like you really got played, Gustav voiced out with a solemn tone after listening to all of Indrik's explanation. Chapter 5:10. Huh. Indrik voiced out with a tone of confusion. He came to me first. I turned him down, then he went for you and instructed you to kill me, Gustav responded. Oh, so I was just a pawn then, Indrik muttered with a crestfallen expression. Yes, you were. He can't handle refusal, and he also knows that I will be onto him for making such a suspicious proposal to me. So he tried using you to get rid of me. Gustav voiced out as his gaze turned sharp. A decision he'll regret making. Gustav's tone turned extremely chill as he spat out. Do you have names of other officers or instructors under his command? Gustav asked. I don't know any other besides the one that was taken into custody a while back. I was kept in the dark about many other cadets under him that were caught by you as well. I only knew 4 of them, Indrik responded. He was cautious enough. This will make it even harder to deal with those that are still hiding in the shadows, Gustav muttered with a contemplative expression. Anyways, this is already good since we know who we're dealing with now. The MBO is pretty sloppy letting all this happen under their nose. But Young is not so bad as well. Shrewd. With the way Gustav was talking it was hard to tell if he was praising young Joe or pissed with him. Maybe it was both, but Indrik could tell that Gustav was also making analysis. He has no idea that I only have to do one thing to get rid of all his pawns. Only problem is it's gonna be time-consuming and I don't have time, Gustav muttered. Indrik could feel a kind of superior aura coming from Gustav's being. This must be why he's able to handle any situation. He spends time making plans on how to deal with them. Indrik felt this was a trait that he was missing because he usually just jumps into action without thinking of how to properly deal with situations. I still don't feel it was worth it sparing you, but let's see if you will be able to change my mind in the future, Gustav said as he started to walk forward. He suddenly stopped and turned to the side to stare at Indrik with a sharp gaze before speaking. But bear in mind that if you ever make any stupid actions or hurt anyone I care about, I will kill you in the most gruesome way possible after inflicting the worst kinds of pain and torture to the point where you question the significance of your existence and beg for your pitiful life to be extinguished. The bloodthirsty energy oozing from Gustav's being at this point was so heavy that even the winds around them began to howl. Indrik subconsciously took a step back after hearing that. Gustav leaped off the icy mountain a moment later, disappearing from Indrik's sight into the distance. In a secluded, office-like space, young Joe sat behind a desk with a dark look on his face as he stared at the group kneeling in front of him. You're telling me that it is no longer possible to take control of Indrik's body, young Joe voiced out with a low but extremely cold tone. Why? Yes, we can no longer take control of his body. The Nanites have gone offline. The middle-aged-looking man who spoke was among the kneeling group of people in medial outfits on their knees. First, this woman catches onto the locked-up parents of the kid, and now this? Young Joe stated before standing to his feet. Such incompetence. Young Joe slowly walked forward as he voiced out. The group of 5 kneeling in front of him clad in medical outfits had looks of fright as he moved towards their position. Young Joe arrived in front of the group leader and placed his hand on the head of the middle-aged-looking man. Give me one good reason why you deserve to be spared for this disappointment, young Joe asked with a smile. SSI, sir. It's not my fault, IPR. Promise to work more efficiently next time. The man stuttered as he pleaded with a frightful look. Failure. I asked you to give me a reason, but you gave me a promise instead. I see why you failed. The instant young Joe finished talking, he let go of the middle-aged man's head, and what came next was, boom, the man's entire head blasted into pieces, causing brain matter and blood to fly across the small room. Plop. The headless body fell to the ground as a fountain of blood kept spewing out of the neck area, staining the floor. Kyre! The rest of the group screamed with frightful looks after witnessing this scene happen right before them. They started shifting backward and pleading for young Joe to spare their lives, but they couldn't escape because right behind them were 2 muscular men clad in black bodysuits. I hope the rest of you have better answers to my question, young Joe said as a smirk appeared on his face while he moved towards the rest. Minutes later, young Joe was walking down a massive glass-like corridor with 2 bodyguards following behind him. The walls were transparent, and massive laboratories in which experiments were being conducted could be seen by the sides. There was a handkerchief in his grasp, which he was using to clean his hands and parts of his suit stained in thick red liquid. Gustav is always finding ways to ruin my plans, young Joe muttered. Good thing he leaves camp in 2 days. Yazria, get ready to implement the elimination plan, young Joe added as they headed towards the exit point up ahead. Yes, Sir Young. One of the 2 men in bodysuits answered from behind. The next day arrived, and it was the last day Gustav would be staying in camp because he would be leaving the next day. He was asked to report to the main entrance and exit hall early in the morning to receive a briefing on his first mission. Chapter 511. He was asked to report to the main entrance and exit hall early in the morning to receive a briefing on his first mission. Gustav did as instructed and traveled towards the hall they arrived in on their first day here. In a few minutes, he got there and moved towards the tasks deployment section. Here to receive information on my outside mission, Gustav voiced out as he arrived in front of the desk. Name? The female officer on the other side of the desk asked while clacking on the holographic keyboard in front of her. Gustav Crimson, Gustav responded, causing her to look up. Oh, it's you. She voiced out with a slightly surprised look. Commander Cilia asked for you to see her in her office the moment you arrive, she added while gesturing towards the direction that led to Commander Cilia's office. Gustav nodded slightly in response and turned to the side before he started moving towards Commander Cilia's office. He still recalled where her office was located and arrived there with ease. Calm. Gustav knocked twice, and the door slid open, revealing the interior large-sized library-like office. There were shelves of books on both sides and a particular rack with weird-looking artifacts behind Commander Cilia's desk. Finally, you've arrived, Gustav, Commander Cilia voiced out as Gustav walked in. There was another male officer dressed in an orange-like MBO uniform sitting right in front of her. He also turned to the side to stare at Gustav the moment he walked in. Gradier Xanatus? Gustav voiced out with a surprised expression the instant he spotted the young man's face sitting in front. Gustav, welcome. Gradier Xanatus smiled in response while speaking. Oh, you two have met. I guess that saves me the need for introduction, Commander Cilia stated with a delighted expression. What are you doing here? Gustav asked after arriving in front of the desk. Here to brief you on your mission, Gradier Xanatus responded. Yes, just as he said, Gradier Xanatus came here to brief you on this. Commander Cilia stretched out her right hand to Gustav, and within it was a small square-shaped device. Gustav reached out to grab it and activated it. True in, a holographic image of a slightly run-down city, and a man appeared right above the device. The man had a very rough look. Scruffy 6 inches long and unkempt-looking ash-colored beards. The scar was running down his left eye with a buzz haircut. This man is known as Sahil Fedralski, the right-hand man of a well-known illegal technological battle equipment distributor. He was last seen around the perimeters of Lineage City, and reports have it that he's hiding within. Currently, there's a civil war in Lineage City, and the world government has yet to deploy any force to deal with the situation due to the closure of all the city's entry points. The mayor has asked to resolve the situation himself, turning down any outside help, which is why we cannot send forces there. He is bothered about the city receiving more destruction from the intervention of outside forces. This man, Sahil, sneaked in amidst the chaos and is currently hiding out there. The MBO has been on his tail for some time, but he's managed to slip away 2 times, and this time he's using the whole situation as a form of protection. Reports have also come in of how Sahil is secretly distributing advanced firearms, which is causing the situation to worsen. Gradier Xanatus paused at this point to make sure Gustav's attention was still focused on him before continuing. We have a way to sneak in 1 or 2 officers, but we can't send anyone there beyond a certain power level due to the lockdown of the city. If this situation lingers on any further without intervention, not only would the city be in more danger of imminent destruction, but Sahil will also escape once again before we get to him, Gradier Xanatus explained. So, you want me to catch this guy? Gustav voiced out. No, you might not be able to handle him, Gradier Xanatus responded. We want you to infiltrate, find him and the team he's working with in distribution of these advanced firearms, and place a tracking device on Sahil. The instant he leaves the city, we would be able to catch him, Gradier Xanatus responded. Oh, I see. Getting close to him and placing a tracking device on him is pretty much him being in my hands. Already, are you sure you don't want me to just catch him? That would save everyone the trouble. I mean, I would have already gone through all the trouble to find him, get close to him, and manage to place the tracking the device on him. Why not just finish it? Gustav questioned with a look of contemplation. Sahil is not so easy to catch. The moment you show any malicious intent, he uses everything in his arsenal to try and escape, and he's truly a pro at escaping. Placing the tracker on him would be so much easier, Gradier Xanatus explained. I'm pretty sure placing the tracker on him won't guarantee anything if he's the kind of person you are painting him to be. He could catch onto it and deactivate it before he leaves the city, or he could even use it to fool you lots and become more cautious after figuring it out, Gustav also explained from his point of view. Gustav, this is a 3-star mission due to its difficulty level. A first year shouldn't be getting more than a 2-star mission, but the higher-ups believing you're capable enough, which is why you were given this. Commander Cilia butted in. If your intention is to catch him yourself, the mission difficulty level would instantly increase to 5, and we will have to take you off it because it's already more than you're supposed to be able to handle being a 3-star mission, she added. Chapter 5:12. Alright then. Gustav decided to fold since it looked like they wouldn't give in. So the instant I placed that tracking device on him, it's mission successful for me? Gustav asked just to be clear. Precisely, Gradier Xanatus responded. This in itself will not be an easy mission to complete, which is why it's a 3-star mission. Talk more of trying to catch him without any backup. The instant he catches on to you or suspects anything, it's game over, Gradier Xanatus added. My see, Gustav noted. His file and other things you need to know about him and Lialuk are all there. Gradier Xanatus pointed at the device in Gustav's hand, which was where all the information was stored. Gustav nodded in response. Also, this case is also linked to a bigger case which involves the one young Miss Amy is working on. So, the success of your mission is paramount, Gradier Xanatus added. Oh? What case exactly is it linked to? Gustav asked with a surprised expression. That is confidential. Bear in mind that you might be meeting her due to the cases being linked. A slight smile appeared on Gradier Xanatus' face as he stated this. Still, he quickly hid the smile from Commander Cilia's view. Oh, I see, Gustav nodded. Is this what she meant when she said she rigged my mission? Gustav had the urge to smirk at this point, but he had to act like he knew nothing about this whole situation. Gradier Xanatus kept briefing Gustav about the mission for about 20 more minutes, and how he would have to keep his MBO officer's badge hidden, and some other things. It was literally a covert operation that wasn't combat-based, so Gustav didn't really feel as hyped up like he did originally. However, it was without a doubt that this would be his first MBO mission, which would be taking place in a war-based location. Gustav kept in mind that anything could happen. Gradier Xanatus also mentioned the possibility of terrorist organizations using this opportunity to try and implement something, hiding under the guise of the ongoing chaos. So, Gustav had to be very careful and gather a lot of information before he arrived there making a move. Minutes later, Gustav returned to his room to digest the details of his first mission and objective information. Gradier Xanatus had mentioned that transport would be ready to get him down to the location first thing 6 a.m. the next morning. So, he should be prepared and gather everything he would need for the trip. According to the briefing, Gustav would be provided with more standard-based equipment that couldn't be found in camp. Also, it had a time duration of 1 month. No one knew how long the civil war would last, but according to the reports, Sahil never stayed in a place for too long to avoid getting caught. Even the 1-month duration was a stretch, but they were hoping Gustav would complete the task within the set period. EE and the others later arrived at Gustav's place to mess around with him again. This was the last day they would see Gustav till whenever he was done and ready to be brought back to camp for further training. So long, bro. We'll be here awaiting your return, Eldris voiced out as they sat in a circle. Yeah, we'll miss your cooking, EE said with a sigh. I for sure won't miss yours, Gustav responded to EE sarcastically. Damn bro, why you got to do me like that? EE voiced out, causing everyone to burst out in laughter. They all stayed and chatted with Gustav until it was late in the night before going back to their rooms. Gustav walked out of his room after they had gone to take a stroll around camp. His eyes moved from place to place as he walked around the camp. He hadn't really spent time appreciating the surroundings in the MBO, so he was just noticing that even though things were intense most times, the MBO camp still gave off a peaceful and safe vibe. The clear and starry skies in the distance, along with the windy atmosphere, generated a kind of feeling within him. He had spent the last 6 months here, so he really did get used to seeing the well-structured buildings since the MBO camp was like a city in itself. Now that he was looking around, he could see that there were a lot of male and female cadets moving around in groups, showing loving gestures to each other. Gustav looked to the side and saw 2 cadets having a mouth-to-mouth activities behind a tree. The MBO didn't allow sexual activities between cadets, but they were not stopped from forming romantic relationships. They were youngsters. After all, it wasn't necessary to take life so seriously every time. Want to be in their shoes. The system suddenly voiced out in his head. No, this isn't necessary, Gustav responded. Yeah, right, keep telling yourself that. I can sense your emotions, so you can't lie to me. The system's cute girl-like voice turned thinner as it spoke. Shoo. Gustav was about to tell it to get lost again when someone called out to him from behind. Gustav. The soft and melodic girlish voice of the person brought him out of his reverie. Angie. Gustav turned around to stare at the 56 tall, beautiful-looking girl with silver and pink-colored hair. She was dressed in a blue crop top wrapped around her chest, bringing up the pair of buns in front and a khaki short. Can I join you? She asked while standing in place. Sure, Gustav responded, and both of them proceeded to start walking around together. For several minutes there was silence between them as they walked from place to place. After a while, Gustav broke the silence. It seems you were right, he muttered. Angie exclaimed with a confused expression. Endrik. It looks like he's truly trying to change now, Gustav said while pausing his footsteps a few feet away from a tree in front. Oh. Angie also paused her footsteps just as he did and turned to the side to face him. Sorry. Chapter 5:13. Oh. Angie also paused her footsteps just as he did and turned to the side to face him. Sorry. Angie's eyes widened as she heard that and stared into Gustav's eyes with a look of awe. You're apologizing? Angie was sure she had never heard that word from Gustav's mouth except on occasions when he was messing around. Well, it turns out you were kind of right, and with the proper guidance, Endrik could have been a better person all those years ago. Although, this doesn't change the fact that he committed those misdeeds and I still don't trust him, Gustav explained. A beaming smile appeared on Angie's face as she heard Gustav's words. You were right too, Angie stated. I should be able to make quick decisions in life-threatening situations. I need to be able to be cold and decisive at moments that matter. I don't want to be a burden, neither do I want to be weak. I want to be strong enough to walk beside you and protect everyone I care about and the weak who can't protect themselves. So whatever comes in the future, I will face it without folding, without backing down. I will no longer run from committing violent deeds when it is deemed necessary, she added with a righteous and decisive tone. Her eyes were shimmering with so much confidence that Gustav could tell that Angie had changed so much since their arrival here. He could tell that if she kept training and growing, she would become a very powerful force to reckon with in the future. He already knew this a long time ago. Still, now he was even surer than before because he could see a fire burning within her eyes that weren't there initially. Also, the special class cadets battle she had been involved in showed that she wasn't holding back like she used to. I guess we shall find out sooner or later if you can truly do all those things you mentioned, Gustav responded before moving forward to lean on the tree in front. Angie's smile remained big as she moved towards Gustav's position. Hey, remember the last time we raced? It's been almost a year now. How about you race me again? Angie proposed while leaning on the tree beside Gustav. What? You're interested in losing again? Gustav voiced out with a ridiculing tone. Such confidence for someone who's clearly slower than I am. Angie responded with a ridiculing tone as well. Haha, you do know that speed isn't the only element involved in winning a race, Gustav stated with a light burst of laughter. Just accept. Or are you scared of eating my dust? Angie responded with a provocative glance. All right, then you're on, Gustav said as he stopped leaning against the tree and straightened himself. Hold on. Just like the last time, we need to have stakes, Angie stated. Okay, what do you propose? Gustav asked. If you win, you get to demand anything from me, Angie stated. I'm pretty sure you don't have anything I need, Gustav responded bluntly. Ouch. Are you sure? Angie asked with a slight look of disappointment. Pretty much, yeah. But I might have something to demand in the future, so maybe you'll just go with this, Gustav replied. Angie. So what about you? What would you want from me if you won? Gustav asked. Just one thing. When I win, I want you to do whatever I want you to this night, Angie stated. This night? All right then, Gustav decided to agree to this. Good. We'll race across camp back to this spot. First person to touch the tree behind us wins, Angie stated with an exciting look. Sure, Gustav responded, and they both proceeded to walk a few steps forward before adopting racing stances. On 3, Angie stated while squatting a little. Gustav nodded in response. 3, 2, sprint has been activated. Gustav decided to activate sprint from the start as this would boost his normal speed by 4 times. At the last second, they both of them breathed out just before. 1. Zerwhoosh. Thwirwhoosh. They both dashed forward with immense speed, generating massive wind turbulence that caused the nearby trees to bend backward as thousands of leaves blew across the place. The other cadets in the vicinity wondered what caused the disturbance. Both of them disappeared into the distance the moment they dashed forward. It was safe to say no one in camp could compare to Angie and Gustav when it came to speed. Both of them traveled in between lineup of hundreds of trees in a matter of seconds, blasting through the area. Occasionally, they had to do a zigzag across the place to dodge the placement of several trees. Still, even after crossing a distance of 5,000 feet, none had outrun the other. Even in the dark of night, Gustav could see like it was daytime, easily dodging obstacles that would be an issue. Angie looked towards the side and could see Gustav blasting through several feet away. She smiled teasingly at him and suddenly increased her speed. Zoom! She instantly gave Gustav a gap of about 30 feet as they arrived on a rocky path that had water flowing on it. Due to the rocks protruding out of different ground parts, it was a bit harder to scale this area. However, Angie still continued to gap Gustav, dashing across the place in a zigzag manner. Even with sprint activated, him struggling to catch up. Gustav was astonished internally as he tried catching up. The officers patrolling this particular area were astonished as they spotted them both dashing past with speed, causing their uniforms to flap intensely. Zoom! Swoosh! From above, the 2 streaks could be seen heading towards a massive waterfall in front. The silver streak was especially eye-catching as it seemed it would be breaking through the sound barrier soon. Gustav pushed himself further as they closed in on the waterfall. He already knew what was coming, and it was pretty obvious also due to the sound of the gushing water and the increase in the water level as they progressed. Chapter 5:14. Angie arrived there first and leaped forward the instant she stepped on a small rock. Swoof! She traveled across the air, following the waterfall dropping towards the stream below. Super jump has been activated. Thumb! Gustav leaped forward with immense speed after activating super jump. His body traveled several hundreds of feet in the air as his body became blurry while flying over the stream below the waterfall. Angie landed on the stream and kept running forward on the surface of the water body. Meanwhile, Gustav's body continued traveling forward above the small stream. Swoosh! Bang! The instant Angie sped out of the stream, Gustav also landed on the dry land in front. He had closed in the gap between them at this point as they started running forward in between the massive line of up mountains up front. Angie started to put a gap in between Gustav and herself again as the race continued on normal grounds. At this point, it had only been a minute, but they were always halfway to finishing the race. Angie would occasionally let Gustav catch up then speed up once again, leaving a 30 to 50 feet gap between them. As they arrived at the last mountain in the distance, they ran across its sloppy surface, arriving above it in a matter of a few seconds, even though it spanned for several 10,000 feet. Gustav and Angie began to close in on the edge of the mountain top and would either have to run down its straight surface in front or jump down. Gustav activated super jump again, but this time a smirk appeared on his face. The instant Angie arrived at the edge of this 7,000 feet mountain and was about to run down it, a massive rumbling force was heard behind her. Gustav suddenly leaped upwards with full force, causing a massive blast to spread across the place as chunks of rocks were sent flying. Boom! The blast traveled across the place, decimating a radius of up to 1,000 feet and causing the mountain to start crumbling. Angie, who had just started dashing downwards across the surface of the mountain, was affected by the immense vibration. As the part of the mountain she was running down blasted open, and she found herself falling through the air along with other pieces of rocks. Gustav, at this point, was already several hundred feet in front, gliding through the air in a free fall pose. He was way ahead at the moment. I told you a race wasn't only about speed, Gustav said internally, while turning to the side to stare at Angie, who was currently far behind. As Angie fell through the air in a spiraling motion, she curled her body up to stabilize herself in midair before reaching out towards the massive piece of rock falling by the side. Angie's body moved towards it, and the instant both her legs made contact, she pushed herself forward with it. Two-ish, her body traveled towards another falling piece of rock several feet away, and she proceeded to perform the same action as earlier. Two-ish, thwoosh, Angie's body traveled in a zigzag motion downwards as she dashed from one falling piece of rock to another. As she arrived before the last one, she leaped in the direction of the mountain wall. The instant she got her footing, she ran down the mountain wall. Swoosh! Only about 100 feet was left, so she easily arrived at the bottom and dashed forward instantly to chase after Gustav that had gone far ahead. Bang! A massive chunk of rock fell on the exact same spot she landed a moment ago. Luckily, she was already several hundred feet in front already. Cheater, Angie said internally as she spotted Gustav's frame more than 1,000 feet ahead, but she wasn't mad after recalling his statement before the race. At this point, they were already starting to close in on the location where their race began. The race would soon be over, and Gustav was way ahead. Looks like it's time to get serious. The instant this thought appeared in Angie's mind, a third horn began to protrude from her forehead. At the same time, she was activating this, Gustav was also activating combination. Sprint plus dash. His speed almost doubled the instant he joined these two, allowing him to cross a distance of over 1,000 feet in a single second. Thwoosh, Angie seemed to have noticed the increase in speed, but the instant the third horn grew out completely, Forwumsh, she broke the speed barrier, causing a loud blast to be sent forth from her position. Her figure traveled over 2,000 feet forward in an instant as whitish waves of energy began to gather around her. The ground ripped open as she moved forward, forming a line due to the immense force of energy gathering around her. Angie's silver hair floated upwards at this point as she closed in on Gustav. Gustav could already see the outline of the tree they started from in the distance, but the instant he smiled, he sensed a powerful force coming from behind. Even in his extremely fast state, Angie's speed was similar to a blur as she dashed past him the instant he turned to look at the side. Angie arrived in front of the tree just when Gustav was a few feet away and thrust her hand forward. Bang! The tree was instantly blasted apart as a massive gust of wind spread across the surroundings. SSHHHSSSHH, Gustav paused his steps, sliding forward a bit and arriving beside Angie. There were loud screams in the background as the wind spread across the place, causing the cadets in the vicinity to be on guard due to the fact that they were nearly swept away by the combined force from Angie and Gustav. Those who had witnessed both of them arrive here were extremely astonished as they never expected that there were cadets that could move at such speed, and they were first years. "I won," Angie said with a smile as her third horn began to withdraw back into her forehead. Chapter 5:15. Yeah, Gustav responded with a surprised expression. "That's quite the speed," Gustav said internally. "You cheated and still lost," Angie said with an obvious tone of ridicule. "Don't rub it in. I let you win this time," Gustav responded while folding his arms. "Shameless," Angie voiced out before bursting out in laughter. "You just destroyed another tree and you're laughing. Now who's shameless?" Gustav stated with a tone of ridicule as well. "Oh snap!" Angie turned to look around and truly just noticed this. Everyone in the vicinity was staring in their direction. Even some officers had arrived on the scene to see what the whole commotion was about. A wry smile appeared on Angie's face as she slowly and awkwardly pulled Gustav away from this location along with her. They both arrived somewhere a little more secluded than the earlier spot and leaned on another tree again. "I hope you want to destroy this one too," Gustav stated while turning to the side to stare at Angie. "You." Angie couldn't find the words to refute as a pout appeared on her face. Gustav just smiled at her expression and turned his face to stare up at the full moon in the sky. "Close your eyes for a minute, and no matter what happens, do not open them," Angie suddenly voiced out. "Huh?" Gustav exclaimed with a confused expression. "I won't remember." "You can't refuse this demand," Angie reminded Gustav. "Oh yeah. Dumb way of using it though," Gustav scoffed after seeing that this was what Angie wanted him to do. Just do it, Angie stated with a slightly flustered expression. Sure, just 1 minute. Easy, they'll start counting down, Gustav said before proceeding to close his eyes just as demanded. His arms were still folded as he leaned his back against the tree. Even though his vision was dark, through his perception, he could sense everything moving in the vicinity. He noticed Angie moving about the place, fidgeting. What's wrong with her? Gustav wondered as he continued counting down. Just when 20 seconds passed, Angie finally moved to Gustav's front and stood directly in front of him. She pulled his folded arms downwards and closed the gap between them further. Gustav placed his arms by the side and didn't revolt or anything since her demand was for him to remain like that. But at this point, Angie's chest was pressed to his, and their faces were only 2 inches apart. Gustav was starting to get restless at this point, and only about 30 seconds were left. Angie suddenly dislodged from him again and moved several feet away with a flustered expression. Gustav was once again confused, but he kept counting down. 15 seconds left, Gustav voiced out as a reminder, ready to get out of the awkward situation. Just when only 10 seconds were left, Gustav was about to voice it again when Angie suddenly moved towards him again. Flowish. Before Gustav could speak, he suddenly felt his mouth enveloped by a soft and warm pair of lips. Soft lips connecting sounds could be heard in the vicinity as Angie merged lips with Gustav and wrapped her hands around his face. Gustav's eyes subconsciously opened for a few seconds at this point as he felt Angie's mesmerizing lips on his. He stared at her cute face as her eyes remained closed while she sucked on his lips passionately. He closed his eyes back as he also started to savor Angie's sweet lips, interchanging from top to bottom lips while placing his hand on her waist and mashing her body against his tighter. Angie's breathing became hurried as she melted into Gustav's embrace, feeling her mind turn numb for the next few seconds before Gustav suddenly pulled his lips from hers. 1 minute. Time up, he muttered with a slightly distressed expression. Angie's face was extremely flushed at the moment. She quickly dislodged from him and moved back while turning her eyes away. She couldn't even make eye contact with Gustav currently and still wondered how she was able to go through with what had just happened. By swoosh, Angie suddenly turned around and dashed away with immense speed. Gustav, who was about to speak earlier, brought his hand down after seeing her run. His face was also a tinge of red. He had never done that before, but natural instinct overtook him earlier, making him perform better than he thought he would win his first time. There goes my first time, Gustav muttered as he prepared to leave the area. You're still a virgin, though. The system suddenly butted in with a tone of ridicule. Gustav, don't call it your first time when you've not even managed to go beyond a kiss. Fuck you, Gustav responded internally before dashing off as well. Just like that, the night went by. For some, it was a nice night. For others, it was mostly a sleepless one. Angie happened to fall into the category that couldn't sleep. The scene with her and Gustav last night kept replaying in her head all night, and now she realized she shouldn't have run off like that. Gustav will be leaving this morning, so she won't be seeing him for some time. She could only hope for his safety and continue to train here. Gustav was also awake all through the night, preparing himself for the next morning. After packing everything, he felt he would be needed for the mission. He took his bath and donned his black uniform. The black MBO uniform was the official outfit of every lower-ranked officer within the MBO. The white uniform he had been wearing day in and out within camp was the cadet outfit. No one within the camp was given this black outfit, except for Gustav, since he was the only real officer in their midst. He grabbed hold of the MBO square-shaped officer badge and placed it in his storage device before moving out of his residence. Chapter 5:16. Currently, it was close to 6 a.m., so Gustav had to find his way to the main hall quickly. Once he moved out of the dragon residence, he spotted a silhouette in the distance. A 57-tall female cadet sporting a gem-like azure-colored hair with pigtails on both sides of her head. A top-notch beauty and an extremely intense gaze that felt like it could pierce through steel. Alevra, what are you doing here? Gustav voiced out as they walked towards each other. You didn't think you'd just leave without saying goodbye, did you? Alevra voiced out before donning a calm smile. I won't be gone for long anyways, Gustav responded as they arrived in front of each other. Good. I'll be sure to take the first spot once again before you get back, Alevra said while moving forward further, standing side by side with Gustav. Don't keep me waiting for too long, Alevra added before she resumed walking forward, passing Gustav completely. Smirk, sure I won't. Hopefully you won't be too weak for me by the time I get back, Gustav responded with a smirk as he also resumed walking forward. Swoosh! Gustav dashed forward a few moments later, headed in the direction of the main hall. In a few minutes, he arrived there and moved in. He was cleared for exit from campgrounds in no time, and Gustav was told to move towards the third massive mirror in the middle of the massive hall. The middle mirror displayed the forest they had arrived in on their first day here. In contrast, the third one displayed a location that seemed to be in front of a massive body of water. Gustav did as he was instructed and moved towards the third mirror. Fyi, his body completely phased through the mirror as he kept walking after arriving before it. Gustav found himself on the other side of the mirror and noticed he was standing in the middle of a massive platform situated in the middle of the ocean. On closer look, this wasn't a platform. Rather, it was a massive ship gliding through the oceanic waters. Officer Crimson, someone called out to him from up ahead. It was another officer dressed in a different type of MBO uniform. I'm Officer Crone, your pilot, he said while reaching out to shake Gustav. Gustav shook his hand back. Follow me, he said while guiding Gustav across the massive ship. Multiple officers could be seen moving around, and with the size of the ship, Gustav couldn't see the end from his position without using God eyes. He followed the officer towards a particular part of the ship where different aircraft were parked. They moved towards a particular silver and blue-colored one amid the advanced-looking aircraft. Sheehan, the aircraft doors instantly glided open as they approached. Please, come in, he said politely while moving in with Gustav following behind. The aircraft was half the size of an old-age plane but bigger than a jet. However, it looked super luxurious on the inside. Unlike the last time when Gustav traveled with an MBO aircraft, he would be all alone in the cabin this time. He quickly moved in and strapped himself in as the pilot started the engine. Suhum, the aircraft lifted off into the air and zoomed off into the distance. It was from above that Gustav could see the outline of the massive ship. It didn't really look like a ship. It seemed more like an exalted platform similar to an island floating above the ocean's surface level. It was square-shaped and very large. The number of officers moving across it was in the hundreds. I wonder what the purpose of this platform is. This was Gustav's final thought before it turned into a tiny dot and became out of sight in the next moment. While the aircraft was in motion, Gustav decided to bring out the information device and read about the city where they were headed. He had already done this before, but since there was nothing to do at the moment, he decided to preoccupy himself with that. The city was literally located on the other side of the world from their current position, according to what Gustav had noticed on the map displayed within the pilot's area. According to the map, the city had harsh dry weather, and sometimes ash fell from the sky. It would have been worse, but in an age of technology, controlling the weather was an easy feat with the right equipment, which was why it was still possible for people to live there. Civil wars still happen? Gustav was still surprised that the city was undergoing a civil war because, based on what he knew of history, civil wars were a thing of the past. They mostly occurred in old-time periods. He had never heard of one happening during his lifetime or in the past 500 years. Although, he still knew that several intense battles still occurred in places across the world due to terrorist organizations, syndicates, and all that. Based on the reports, Lineage City plunged into a civil war due to several powerful groups coming into a disagreement on how much influence the world government was supposed to have on the city. Lineage City, just like many other cities, signed treaties with the world government. Still, they had continued to remain traditional in the sharing of power within the several powerful groups that were in existence since the beginning, only giving the world government a small portion of authority. This portion of power slowly expanded, and some of those groups noticed their authority and influence in the city reduced over the years. The affected ones wanted to retain their control of the city and voiced out their disagreement with the world government's power expansion, while the others who seemed unaffected didn't care and chose to side with the world government. The tension continued to escalate as these groups started to show hostile behaviors until the whole situation blew up to this extent. The city's citizens also got involved due to the degrading situation of the city's economic state, causing a full-blown civil war of people choosing sides. Chapter 5:17. The city's citizens also got involved due to the degrading situation of the city's economic state, becoming a full-blown civil war of people choosing sides. Gustav had all the information he needed on the groups in power, so he had already planned his first steps out as they journeyed across the skies. He could tell that things would be really chaotic, but he prepared his mind for whatever was to come. About an hour later, Skrirev, a loud whistling sound suddenly reverberated across the place as alarms started blaring within the aircraft. The pilot's eyes widened as he quickly steered the aircraft out of the way. Fuwu, a blue beam shot across the sky, passing by the side of the aircraft. It was only inches away from grazing the aircraft, and even though there was no contact, the force from the beam rattled the plane vigorously. Gustav was already alerted at this point as he turned to face the pilot's corner. "What's happening?" he voiced out with a confused expression. "We're under attack," the pilot voiced out loudly from ahead. Gustav had already thought of this, but he was quite shocked that this would be happening. "From who?" Gustav asked as he prepared to unstrap himself. Unidentified Azalon jet in pursuit. The voice of an AI resounded within the aircraft as a projection of a massive black rhombus-shaped jet appeared in front of Gustav. "What the hell is that?" Gustav voiced out with a tone of disbelief after seeing just how the jet had different weaponry strapped to it. Zoom, the pilot moved the aircraft forward at full speed and dodged to the side to avoid another incoming projectile. This time, a purplish ray blasted past them, causing the aircraft to vibrate intensely once again. Gustav lost his balance while trying to stand and nearly got blasted towards the back of the plane. It's an Azalon jet, one of the top 10 most powerful flying weapons in the world. It doesn't need to be piloted by anyone. It only needs to be locked onto its target and it will annihilate them, the pilot explained while still flying across the sky and dodging the multiple projectiles. "Just stay in your seat. I've got this," the pilot voiced out after noticing Gustav trying to stand once again. Gustav stared at the pilot from behind with a contemplative expression before leaning back and strapping himself to the seat once again. The pilot's eyes squinted as he moved his right hand away from the control wheel, piloting with just his left hand, tapping on some keys within the cockpit. From outside, within the clouds high up, these two aircraft could be seen bolting across the sky at immense speed. One was twice the size of the other, and it happened to be the Azalon jet. Twi. It would occasionally shoot out attacks of different kinds, missiles, and bolts of energy. Still, the pilot of the Embio aircraft seemed to be very skilled. He dodged every single projectile skillfully as three massive cannon-like weapons protruded from the sides of the aircraft. However, no attack was shot out yet. The aircraft kept gliding through the air and dodging the projectiles from behind. Zoom! All of a sudden, the Embio aircraft accelerated into the sky and disappeared into a cloud. The aircraft behind shot through the massive cotton of cloud and arrived on the other side. However, he was unable to see the aircraft. It quickly decelerated and started sweeping from place to place across the sky, looking for the Embio aircraft. This continued for about 30 seconds before the Embio aircraft suddenly appeared on its rear. Zoom! Boom! It shot out a powerful penetrative red beam that slammed into the left bottom corner of the jet. Zwii! As the jet tilted to the side after taking the damage, the Embio aircraft swerved towards the back. They shot out another beam towards a particular corner of the jet. Boom! A loud explosion blasted across the sky as this second attack destroyed half of the jet. It started diving downwards, falling through the clouds. You really think having a nearly impenetrable covering makes you the intimidating? Hee. The pilot laughed lightly within the aircraft as he moved forward with speed, ignoring the crashing jet behind. He's good. Gustav had to admit that this was one good pilot. At the start of the attack, the whole situation seemed dangerous with the pilot's expression, which was why Gustav was ready to spring into action, thinking he wouldn't be able to handle it. It seemed the pilot was only surprised at the fact that they were getting attacked. Gustav had witnessed the whole exchange between both aircraft through both the holographic projection in front of him and his perception that could sense outside of the aircraft. Based on what the pilot had said, it would seem the jet was almost impenetrable. Still, he seemed to have targeted the weak spots, which he wouldn't have been able to lock onto if he didn't keep running at first and pull the disappearing trick he did earlier. What none of them noticed was a red object that dislodged from the crashing jet, flying in the direction where their aircraft was headed. This red object turned invisible as it bolted through the skies in the same direction the aircraft disappeared into. Reporting an air attack at coordinates. Gustav sat back with a contemplative expression as he listened to the pilot report the incident that had just happened while still gliding through the sky. It was a wonder why anyone would try shooting them down. There weren't a lot of organizations that had the balls to attack an MBO aircraft, and even those that did wouldn't try it so as not to incur the wrath of the MBO. This led Gustav to think of two possible theories. Either these people were stupid or confident enough not to leave any tracks behind. Currently, a troop of MBO officers was heading towards the crash spot to investigate where the jet was sent out from. Chapter 5:18. It was already a given that this wasn't a common occurrence with the pilot's reaction, which led Gustav to one final realization. This attack was directed towards me. Young Joe, maybe? This was the only person Gustav could think of at the moment. It was unlikely that anyone else would try this because even though he amassed quite the fame during the MBO test phases, he hadn't built enough prestige for any enemy force to truly consider him a threat. This was his thought process, and he could only think of young Joe being the culprit. About 3 hours later, Gustav could see the aircraft descending a little bit as they arrived at the end of a side of the Pacific Ocean. They glided past it, arriving above a massive city. This city had different kinds of small 2- to 3-story buildings lined up in rows and columns. They were so loosely joined that one would think there were no spaces in between. However, it looked very beautiful and quite civilized due to the well-constructed passageways in different areas and a floating train rail connected to different city points. "We have arrived in Ruhugi City, a neighboring city to Lialuk City," the pilot voiced out as the aircraft began to slow down. They kept moving for about a few hundred miles before they arrived above a small forestry area. Within this forestry area, a visible cleared-out space could be seen up front. It was the size of 3 football fields combined, and camp houses could be seen. The aircraft descended at a clear spot by the right side amidst the stares of a group of officers who seemed to have been expecting their arrival. TSSSHHHH, the door slid open, and Gustav walked out of the aircraft with the pilot. The group of officers in the vicinity were already walking towards them. Officer Crimson, welcome, the leading officer, who happened to be a tan man with a buzz cut and buff stature, was the first to arrive in front of Gustav and offer a handshake. Gustav responded by receiving the hand and returning the handshake. Still, after a few seconds passed, the officer didn't let go of his hand. "I heard you are quite powerful among the cadets," he said as he tightened his grip around Gustav's hand. "I have been deployed here as an officer and not a cadet," Gustav responded while retaining his grip on the man's hand without changing expression. "Oh, but just how strong are you?" the officer questioned with a sharp gaze while a grin appeared on his face. "Strong enough to get a 3-star mission as a debut," Gustav responded. At the same time, his grip also turned tighter without showing any form of expression. The officers in the background stared at the two without saying a word as the atmosphere turned tenser and tenser. All of a sudden, "Ha ha ha, I'm just messing with you, kid. Welcome," the tanned buzz-cut officer voiced out with a playful tone as he let go of Gustav and patted his shoulder. Gustav's expression was still the same. "I'm Officer Gooseman, the one supervising this mission. I will be in touch with you while you're carrying out your mission to share information and instructions on different occasions when needed," he explained while turning around to walk with Gustav. "This is Officer Louis Integro, Officer Millie Brown, and Officer Tron Bosco," he introduced the other 3 officers behind, who were lined up just as he had called them sequentially. A massive 7-foot-tall man with long red hair, a stunning mixed Latino-looking lady with an hourglass figure and tied-up black hair, and lastly, a fat 6-foot-tall bald man with a stomach similar to the size of 7 balls joined together. They all greeted Gustav, and he returned the greeting as well. "We will be providing you with assistance as well," Officer Millie Brown voiced out. "I'm in charge of the equipment you will need for the break-in operation into Lineage City," she added. "Both of us will deal with helping you get in undetected," Officer Louis Integro voiced out with a deep tone next while hinting at the other officer, Tron Bosco, who nodded in response. Gustav noted that and followed them as they headed towards the massive tent placed in the middle of the place. The instant they walked in, Gustav felt as if he had arrived in a different place entirely. The internal structure of the tent was just so well designed. It looked like a standard base of operation. Several holographic monitors were stationed at different points, displaying the ongoing civil war within Lineage City. It showed several places within the city that had nearly been completely decimated, and somewhere battles were ongoing presently. As you can see, Lineage City is still in a state of disarray. Since the MBO haven't been given the go-ahead to infiltrate, we have no way of sending in a team to catch Sahil, Officer Gooseman said while staring at the holographic monitor that displayed a picture of Sahil as well as his information. Gustav looked around, staring at the different projections that displayed what was currently happening. There was one where he could see the view of the city from up above. "Is that a dome?" Gustav asked after noticing the barely visible outline of a circular barrier covering the city. "Precisely. This is what stops anyone beyond a certain power level from going in undetected. This is why we need you. You happen to be the weakest here, but not just that. According to the reports, you're more suitable for the job due to your distinction within camp," Officer Gooseman stated bluntly. Gustav's expression remained unchanged, even though it sounded like an insult. "They are right. I have picked in on information regarding the dome. It detects mixed bloods from power level Echo rank and above. Those are considered to be threats since they would be able to break in due to their strength." Chapter 519. Any mixed blood below that level will not be able to break through the barrier with their strength. You're still peak level martial rank, so you qualify. Everyone in this room besides you is Echo rank and above, the system explained in Gustav's mind. "Oh, I see," Gustav noted. "If we have to wait for the permission of the world government to go in and calm the situation down, Sahil would be able to escape," Officer Gooseman stated. "I only have to find him and place a tracker on him. Seems like a simple job," Gustav stated. "Don't underestimate the opponent, especially since this is your first mission," Officer Millie Brown stated from the side. "Getting in is guaranteed with our input. Getting out also won't be too much of an issue since the barrier is created to prevent entry not leaving. But finding Sahil himself will be the most difficult aspect," Officer Gooseman added. "Remember, it's a war, kid. You can find yourself in a battle at any point in time," Officer Louis Integro voiced out from the side as well. "There will be combatants on your level of power there as well, so don't get too cocky. This isn't the MBO camp. This is the real deal," Officer Tron Bosco voiced out. Every time he spoke, his belly shook due to its massive size. "I can see that," Gustav responded with an unbothered expression. TSK, these kids are always so confident until they find themselves in dangerous situations and shit their pants," Officer Millie Brown added. "I don't think that will happen with this kid. Anyways, moving on." Officer Gooseman continued speaking. He explained and pointed out different parts of the city where it was suspected that Sahil would be located. Some of them happened to be the most dangerous spots in the city where occasional battles usually broke out. A state of emergency had long been issued within the city, so being in a household doesn't make you safe. You won't be able to sleep properly at night since danger lurks at every corner. Officer Gooseman kept speaking and then gave Gustav some ideas to keep himself safe while on the endeavor. At this point, over 2,000 deaths have been reported, but the world government are not allowed to put in unless it reaches up to 10,000, and we can't wait that long. Also, we can't expect bodies to keep piling up for the sake of wanting to catch one person. The civil war may even end before the death toll reaches that high, and all these would still lead to Sahil's escape, so this mission is very crucial, Officer Gooseman advised. Gustav nodded slightly in response as he noted these locations, putting them at the back of his mind. "When do I leave?" Gustav asked. "Tomorrow morning by 6 a.m. Officers Louis and Tron will be accompanying you to the break-in point," Officer Gooseman responded. "In the meantime, Officer Millie will walk you through the features of every gadget you will be receiving. he added while gesturing at Officer Millie. Officer Millie gestured for Gustav to follow her out of the main tent, which he did. As they walked out, Gustav wondered why Miss Amy wasn't here when Gradier Zanatus had stated that this case was linked to one she was working on. He decided to put it at the back of his mind for now, as he walked into the equipment tent with Officer Millie. This tent was smaller compared to the previous one. Still, upon entering, Gustav could see rows and rows of different kinds of gadgets and weaponry stacked on them. Officer Millie moved to one of the first and picked a button-sized white device. This is AF-21. It can grant you invisibility for 10 seconds. However, you can only use it a total of 4 times before it runs out of energy. Being in Lialuk City means you won't be able to recharge it, so use it wisely, she explained. Gustav received it from her and placed it in his storage device. She walked over to a rack where some silver-colored circular-shaped objects were lined up and picked up 17 of them. A small detonator capable of decimating a bungalow-sized building, she said while handing them over to Gustav. Each one was the size of a pinky fingernail. They were so small, anyone would think they were harmless. She moved on and handed Gustav some advanced smoke grenades, as well as some other gadgetry that might be needed. She finally arrived in front of a weaponry rack. Here, several types of weapons could be seen, ranging from those that help with melee combat and long-distance combat. Gustav could see guns shaped in different ways, glowing with infused energy stones. Also blades and daggers looking so sharp that they could be felt without making contact. What kind of weapon are you skilled in welding? She asked Gustav. Gustav recalled training within the MBO with some weapons during combat class. Even though he seemed proficient in all, he wasn't really a gun person. So he looked around the rack. What does that one do? Gustav voiced out while pointing at a red-hilted katana placed by the ledge. Oh, that one is too powerful for you to handle. Chose another one, she said with a dismissive expression. How do you mean? Gustav asked. It has the power to cleave steel or any tough or solid metal with ease based on the wielder, she explained. Its powers is revealed with a swing, but you will not be able to swing it, she added. Gustav moved over and reached out to grab it. No, she reached out to stop him, but it was too late. ZZZHIIXXXX, a charge of electric current ran through Gustav's hand the moment he made contact with it, causing him to be tossed backward by a few feet. Bam! Gustav slammed into some of the racks behind. Ow! He voiced out bluntly before picking himself back up with an unbothered expression and checking his hand. Scorch marks had appeared on his skin, but right before his very eyes, the scorch marks began to disappear as he healed. It easily broke through my defense? Gustav was astonished. Chapter 520. It easily broke through my defense? Gustav was astonished as he stood in place and stared at his hand. Are you all right? Officer Millie voiced out with concern as she arrived in front of him. Yeah, I'm good, Gustav responded while waving his right hand to get rid of the numbness. I wanted to tell you that using it also damages the wielder. The more destructive you want it to be, the more damage it inflicts, she stated. Oh, all right, Gustav stated as he began walking towards the front again. He suddenly stretched out his hand towards the hilt of the sword again before Officer Millie could react. What are you do? Before she could complete her sentence, Gustav had already grabbed hold of the hilt. Bzzzztt, the electric arcs appeared again, electrocuting Gustav's hand, but he was already prepared for it unlike the last time. He hardened his body as he forcefully picked the katana up and unsheathed it even while the electrocution was still happening. The entire blade was up to 4 feet long and reddish in color, with blue arcs of electricity swimming across it with intensity. Swoosh! Dashing out of the tent, Gustav arrived outside instantly and swung the katana forward with force. Sweezweezed, a 27 feet long reddish arc covered in lightning bolts traveled forward from the katana towards the forest in front. Loud vibrations rocked the place as about 70 trees in front were instantly cleaved in half and set on fire as the arc traveled forward non-stop. Fwoo! A blazing fire rose up, causing Gustav's eyes to slightly widen. Oh! Who knew it was this effective? He voiced out with a wry smile before sheathing the katana back and placing it in his storage ring. The instant it disappeared into his storage ring, Gustav's arm trembled a bit from the intense electrocution his arm went through while trying to swing the katana. "We'll take this one," Gustav said to Officer Millie, who had just walked out of the tent and witnessed what just happened. Her eyes, along with her mouth, were still wide open. How is a martial-ranked cadet able to swing the Jiko Hakai katana? With barely any damage for that matter. From the first touch he should have passed out. She couldn't wrap her head around what she had just witnessed. The other officers had also come out at this point to see half the forest in front of them nearly burnt to the ground. What happened? Are we under attack? This was their first question. Officer Millie quickly explained to them what had just gone down. They also stared at Gustav with looks of surprise, not wanting to believe he actually managed to swing the sword without being turned into a shish kebab. Gustav was actually harmed, but his body had the regenerative function, which was why he wasn't bothered about causing self-sabotage to himself. He's gotta have one hell of a pain resistance, or his body is so tough that such high voltage of electricity barely damages him. "Like you, Tron," Officer Gooseman voiced out while staring in Gustav's direction. Officer Tron's stomach shook as he nodded. It is very impressive for a cadet to be able to wield it and even swing the Jiko Hakai katana without getting roasted to a crisp. Even some full-fledged officers would have passed out after one swing since not everyone has a great body defense, he praised. "Why are we just watching the forest burn? Lewis, do something about this," Officer Gooseman instructed. Officer Louis Integro nodded and walked forward with his massive body. He arrived a few feet in front of the burning forest and stretched both hands sideways. "Pa! Fowu!" The instant he clapped both hands together, a blast of icy energy burst forth. The environment was instantly developed with cold as ice instant covered the entire burning forest in a matter of seconds, forming icicles in spots where the fire was initially seen. He withdrew his hand after a few seconds, and it could be seen that the forest had literally turned into the North Pole. Snow covered the trees along with fog, spreading to every part of the forest. "Kid, maybe next time don't destroy nature. We only have a little of that left," Officer Gooseman said to Gustav. "My bad. I didn't expect it to be this effective," Gustav explained. "Good thing I didn't use my full strength," he sighed internally in relief. The power of the Jiko Hakai katana is extremely high, but trying to use its full power will only end up destroying the wielder, the system voiced out in Gustav's head. "I see. If I tried wielding it at full strength, what would happen?" Gustav asked internally. "Your arm will be blasted off. If you tried using it with transformation while activating some of your bloodlines to give power boost, half of your body will be blasted apart, and you might not survive based on your current regeneration level," the system explained with a solemn tone. "Oh, that's pretty dangerous." Gustav was intrigued to see how much destruction could be created at his fully powered swing. Still, now that the system had told him this, he had to reconsider using it beyond a certain level. Gustav was later shown to the tent where he'd be spending the night. Currently, it was still afternoon, so he had time to finish his daily tasks and channel his bloodline before night fell. About 2 hours later, Gustav was done with his daily tasks and returned to his room to channel his bloodline. Just now, one of his tasks involved going around Ruhuggy City, which he just did. He was actually jumping from rooftops to rooftops across the city, which initially got people alarmed because they thought he was a burglar. However, when they noticed him dressed in MBO uniform, they turned respectful. Most of them were very surprised to see someone looking so young, an officer in the MBO. The instant Gustav sat on the bed provided him in his tent, he rolled his left sleeves up and tapped a particular part of his wrist. Zing. Chapter 521. Zing, a small silver-colored bracelet appeared on his wrist, glowing blue light on its surface. For green bars appeared on them, which indicated their battery life. This was the Grade 7 spatial bracelet Gustav had gotten from the base weapons vault back then. "Time to pick another checkpoint," Gustav said as he tapped on the screen surface of the bracelet. A few seconds later, a small web-like bluish glow appeared in front of Gustav. It disappeared in the next instant, and Gustav smiled. 2 more slots left. Gustav muttered as the bracelet turned invisible. Originally, the Grade 7 spatial bracelet had 4 slots, so there could only be 4 checkpoints where Gustav could teleport to at will so long as the bracelet was charged. This was the second checkpoint he was setting. The first was back in camp, and his plan was to set the third checkpoint in Lilac City. He had no idea if the barrier covering Lilac was going to interfere with the power of the spatial bracelet or not. However, if it did work, this would make it easier for him to leave and return at any time he willed. He still remembered Great Commander Cheyenne mentioning that a Grade 7 spatial bracelet was so rare that only 2 were available within the base weapons vault, and he happened to have taken one. He hoped that with this, there wouldn't be any issues because it would come in handy if he could escape from any unforeseen situations. The next morning arrived in a flash as Gustav found himself awake at 5 a.m. He was already used to this. This might also be his last night enjoying a peaceful sleep before embarking on the mission. He might not even have any sleep at all for the next few nights. Gustav stayed in his room, channeling his bloodline for about 30 minutes before he was called out. By 5:30, there was another short briefing within the main tent with the officers. They handed Gustav a two-way communication device, but advised him not to use it too frequently due to the city's government tracking any form of communication coming through or going out of the barrier. They also couldn't contact him frequently due to this. There were so many risks involved. After the briefing, Gustav and the 2 officers, Tron Bosco and Louis Integro, had land vehicles parked by the side they used for transport. Gustav followed them in the vehicle, and they drove off out of the forest. About 30 minutes later, they had arrived at a small mountain pass where they had to drive by the side of the mountain. After arriving at the end of the pass, they parked the vehicle. Officer Lewis explained that they were close to the outskirts of the western part of the city. They had to walk because using a vehicle would attract the attention of military forces parading around the barrier from time to time. They treaded softly at this point, and several thousand meters ahead, Gustav could already see the outline of a part of Lilac City. This part looked like it had already been burnt to the grounds, and the barely visible dome was centered around a few feet in front, which would most likely prevent entry. They hid behind a huge piece of rock while observing the surroundings. Officer Tron brought out 2 rectangular-shaped red devices and threw them out. He threw one towards the far west and the other towards the east. Try. Both devices landed a few feet away from the dome and flashed a bright red light before disappearing. "Let's move," Officer Lewis voiced out. They moved away from the covering of the rock towards the dome up ahead. The instant they arrived before the dome, Officer Tron brought out a large 7-foot-tall equipment from his spatial storage device. "Stand right in front of the dome and place one of your hands an inch away from it," they instructed. Gustav complied and stretched his right hand forward, stopping just 1 inch away. Even without making contact, he could feel the energy from the dome. "I could absorb all this in my energy containers, but it would ruin the mission," Gustav said internally, knowing that the people in authority within the city would instantly be alerted if he tried that. Officer Tron moved the 7-foot device close to Gustav's back and asked him to remain still. Officer Tron turned to the side and nodded to Officer Lewis. Now, Officer Lewis stood behind Officer Tron and placed both his hands on his shoulders. In contrast, Officer Tron placed both his hands on the device behind Gustav. Suddenly, Gustav felt a massive amount of energy gathering behind him. Officer Lewis' hands on Tron's shoulder displayed an icy glow, while Officer Tron's hands exuded a red glow as he retained contact with the device. The device began to charge up, shining a milky-colored light. Gustav saw his body turning a bit transparent, and he felt a little woozy. "Go in now," Officer Tron shouted from behind while groaning like he was in pain. Even though Gustav felt woozy, the instructions sounded clear in his head. He proceeded to move forward, and his body phased right through the barrier, and he arrived on the other side. The instant he got through, his body returned back to normal, and he stared at both officers through the layer of barrier in between them. They looked a bit worn out, but he also noticed their looks of caution like something had happened. This signaled to Gustav to keep moving as they quickly packed up the equipment hurriedly and turned around. Gustav did as he was told and dashed straight through the decimated street. Meanwhile, some military troops behind the dome seemed to have arrived on the scene since they sensed a weird flux of energy. But to their surprise, they didn't find anyone there. What they didn't notice was 2 barely visible outlines hiding behind a piece of rock in the distance. They couldn't see them because both officers had made use of the gadget that turned a person invisible for 10 seconds. This allowed them to get out of the range of detection. Chapter 5:22. What they didn't notice was two barely visible outlines hiding behind a piece of rock in the distance. They couldn't see them because both officers had made use of the gadget that turned a person invisible for 10 seconds. This allowed them to get out of the range of detection. The two devices Officer Tron threw out the detection devices that alerted them of the incoming troops the instant Gustav phased in. The troops later left, allowing both officers to scurry back towards the location where the land vehicle was parked. At this point, Gustav was still within the decimated part of the city he arrived at a few minutes back. His clothes had long been changed into a ragged one before their arrival here, so he would fit in. Gustav crouched as he arrived at a part of the city where broken pieces of buildings piled upon one another. He reached out and touched the sand before rubbing it on his face to make himself look even messier. Srrhhhhyykk, his face slowly morphed, making him look a bit older with an oblong-shaped face and a small mustache. He looked totally different from his original look. Gustav moved forward slowly towards a part of the city that still looked to fairly be in shape. Behind, he had already passed by so many destroyed buildings and a litter of corpses. Most corpses had incomplete body parts, which depicted that they all died gruesome deaths. Crunch! Gustav exclaimed with a low tone as he felt he stepped on something. Upon looking down at his left foot, he noticed it was a piece of a cut-off arm. Not just any arm, but from the size, it looked to be the arm of a kid. Gustav squatted again and sighed. War knows no age, size of person. It truly destroys all, he muttered while preparing to stand up when he noticed something. Clutched in the grasp of the closed hand was a small round device. Gustav grabbed hold of the arm and forcefully pried open the hand before grabbing hold of the ball. God Eyes has been activated. What's a kid doing with a bomb? Gustav questioned with a contemplative expression. He could see the same properties within this device was similar to how the internal structure of a bomb looked. Kita are not permitted to participate in wars. Which psycho would send a kid on this suicide mission? Gustav muttered internally as he stood to his feet. He was initially okay with the whole situation, understanding that the kid might have been caught in the crossfire, but now that he had seen this, he was positive that the kid must have been among the combat forces battling here. The bomb wasn't detonated, which meant the kid had weapons in their possession. Gustav stood up and kept the bomb in his storage device before moving forward. He already knew what he was getting into by coming here, but it was still disappointing nevertheless. The fact that the world government couldn't interfere and end this made things even worse. Gustav had decided he was going to get to the bottom of everything before leaving this place. He walked within a street that was fairly in good condition, but he still hadn't found a single living person. The buildings that looked okay had their doors shut and windows completely covered. Using his perception, Gustav found out that there were people who were alive in this vicinity. Still, it seemed they locked themselves indoors in fear of the brutality going on outside. Gustav only felt they were lucky enough that the battles here didn't blast their buildings away. However, Gustav could tell that soon enough. Some of them would have to come out to source for food because whatever they had stored would eventually finish. Gustav kept moving from place to place for up to an hour, and all that time spent was only used for marking how the places looked, while searching for a place to shelter himself for nighttime. During the time he spent walking, he had only seen a few people come out of their homes. They all looked tattered and dirty as well, so Gustav fit in. This particular region was one of the locations where it was mentioned that Sahil might be hiding, but so far, Gustav hadn't even noticed anything out of the ordinary. About an hour more later, Gustav had scoured this whole region on foot. He visited what was left of the bus stations, the nearly run-down upwards where trains used to travel over the city with floating railways. So many spots, but nothing seems to be happening in this region as of now. Just as Gustav was about to go round again, the sounds of fast footsteps suddenly reverberated across the environment from up front. Gustav noticed that several people who were on this part of the streets started running. A middle-aged man tapped Gustav as he ran. "The Zalabans are coming," he voiced out and kept running. He felt Gustav had no clue of the situation, which was why he alarmed him. Gustav looked around the vicinity. He had already found somewhere he could hide out around here, but the wall by the side had been blasted open. Gustav turned to face the building on his right and leaped towards the second floor. Swooh! He landed in front of an empty apartment that had its back wall blasted open. Gustav walked in through the door space, which was wider than it was supposed to be, and quickly moved towards the left area of the wall. He bloated slightly as his body transformed into a greenish fur appeared on his body, and another head began to grow on his back. Activated partial collapsal transformation. Gustav placed his hand on the wall, and smooth-looking icicle-like walls protruded out of his hands and onto the edge. These icicle-like walls joined the wall on the left to the wall on the right, closing up the space of the broken wall behind. Chapter 5:23. Gustav didn't stop. He kept it up till the holes in the roof were covered alongside part of the entrance, leaving only a little space. Looking at how he had constructed the house and turned it back to being a proper shelter, Gustav had a gratified look on his face. He moved towards the entrance area and stared at the street from the small hole he left. Others that were out earlier had also moved back into their abodes. A few moments later, a troop dressed in all black vests and helmets came walking by the street. They were about 20 in number, armed with advanced weaponry, from what Gustav could see. The Zalabans. Gustav noted how they looked and also saw a crescent moon emblem on the left side of their vests with a small eyeball positioned above it. This was one of the 6 most powerful groups in the city against those who initiated the Civil War. Gustav had read about them, and according to the reports, they were brutal to anyone who opposed them, including the citizens. The citizens usually hid in their homes upon seeing this group because they would not hesitate to cut down anyone, and they were highly unpredictable. According to them, they were preserving the peace by dealing with anyone who was found outside their homes. Some of the citizens were on the side of those who were fighting to reclaim power from the world government, and some were on the sides of this group, while others didn't care about all that. They just wanted their old lives back. This particular group didn't care about all that. They messed with anyone regardless of what side they chose. These idiots came out of their houses again. I can see the footprints on the dirt. They have to be on the side of the enemy for them to do such. The ones at the front voiced out as they looked around, tracing the footsteps. Blaster, that house. One of them shouted out and pointed towards the house opposite Gustav's current hideout. The person with a gigantic frame in their midst moved towards the front of the house with a massive cannon-like device in his grasp. His footsteps made loud noises as he took steps which depicted that this might be heavy. Zuinuin, a blue beam started charging up around the muzzle area of the weapon. Boom! It was shot towards the bungalow-sized house in front, and what was heard next were screams. Kyr! The massive hole had appeared on one side of the wall, and cracks started spreading across the rest before the walls crumbled down entirely. A family of 5 could be seen within the household crooked up together with visible signs of fear on their faces. 2 parents, a teenage girl, and 2 young boys. Some of the troops moved forward and surrounded them while pointing their weapons towards them. The person who seemed to be like the leader among the group moved forward and reached out his hand to grab hold of the father's head. Kyr! No! Father! The children and the wife screamed out as the man was dragged away. Did you forget you were supposed to stay indoors? Disobeying means you are going against the government, and going against the government means punishment from us. The group leader voiced out with a raspy tone. Please, I needed to feed my family. We have nothing left. How are we going to survive without food? The man pleaded with a fearful and apologetic look. You were provided with palliatives. Don't act like you got nothing. The group leader voiced out before throwing the back of his hand towards the man's face. Pa! The smack sent him flying backward with blood jetting out of his mouth. 2 people from the troops reached out and picked him up before bringing him to the front of the leader again. Please, the palliatives were barely enough to feed my children and wife. The man still kept pleading while gesturing at his family. Oh, you mean them? The group leader voiced out with a condescending tone while turning to look at the rest of the family. A smirk appeared on his face as he walked forward. Why don't I help you with that then? He said after arriving in front of the other family members. The father, who was still kneeling in front, turned around as he heard that. What do you mean? He questioned while blood kept dripping from his mouth. I will help you reduce the number of your family members, so the palliatives will be enough. Just as the group leader voiced that out, a weirdly shaped blade appeared in his hand, which he swung forward. Swai, the wife's head, was smoothly cleaved off. Plop. It fell to the ground along with her body, while blood gushed out like a fountain from her headless neck. Kyre! Mum! No! All four of them shouted out in fright as a fountain of tears streamed down their faces. The father's eyes widened as he stared at his wife's headless body. He couldn't believe his eyes. He saw his life flash before his eyes as he stood to his feet and ran towards the leader in a bid to attack him. "They'll kill you," he shouted out in a fit of rage as he brought out a sharp object from his pocket. The leader easily swerved to the side and thrust out his left leg towards the father's side. Bang! A loud bone-cracking sound reverberated across the place as the man was sent flying to the side and kept rolling as he vomited blood. The troops reached out to hold him down and brought him towards the group leader on his knees. "I have helped you reduce the size of your family to make feeding easier. You should be thanking me, not trying to stab me," he voiced out into the ears of the weeping man who had just been widowed. Gustav, who was watching this from within his hideout, had a dark expression on his face after witnessing what had just gone down. Remember, you can't interfere with the war. The system could sense the rage building up within him, so it quickly reminded him. Chapter 5:24. Remember, you can't interfere with the war. The system could sense the rage building up within him, so it quickly reminded. Gustav recalled the conversation at the tent base of operations where the officers had advised him several times not to interfere with battles happening between citizens or situations like this unless he was directly involved. According to them, staying hidden most times was the best, so he wouldn't attract attention to himself. His power level was among the highest that could be found within the city, so it would pretty much get suspicious if he kept revealing himself, which was why they advised him to only battle in situations where he couldn't escape from. "I know. I wasn't gonna interfere anyways," Gustav answered without showing any expression whatsoever. The system remained silent after hearing that, and they kept watching what was going on. The leader of the group started walking in circles around the man. "Or you think this still isn't enough generosity?" he voiced out with a condescending tone. "All right then, let me help you more," he added with a weird tone before moving towards the frightened kids. He reached out and grabbed the head of the teenage girl. "No. What are you doing? Don't touch my daughter. Don't harm her." The father kept shouting out as he saw this, but two people from the troops kept holding him down. "Harm her? No, definitely not. I won't do that," the leader voiced out, causing the man to calm down. "Faskia, what do you think about her?" the leader voiced out while running his hand along the girl's face and turning her from side to side. The girl had a lightly tanned face with beautiful brown eyes and curly blonde hair, and she looked no older than 16, but her face was smeared with dirt. "Do you think she'll be to Commander Fabian's liking?" the leader of the group asked while a big fat person from the troop walked towards them. "Sir Lucius, once she's all cleaned up, her beauty will show. Commander Fabian likes them this way," Fabian voiced out. "All right, she's coming with us. Take her," the leader of the group known as Sir Lucius Commander as he turned around. "No, please, don't touch my daughter." The father kept pleading along with the two brothers. "Kyre," the girl screamed out as one of the men lifted her on his shoulder and started carting her away. She struggled, kicking and scratching, but she was no match for the strength of fully grown mixed bloods. "I have assisted you once again. Now, you only have 2 mouths to feed. No more complaints," Sir Lucius voiced out as he walked past the father, who quickly reached out to hold his leg. "Please, don't take her. She's only 16. He kept pleading, but it fell on deaf ears. Sir Lucius pulled his leg from the father's grasp and stomped on his head before he continued moving again. The father ignored his bleeding head and quickly jumped to catch Sir Lucius' leg again. "Please, I beg of you." Gustav, who was watching from the other side of the building, began to silently tremble as rage kept building up in his mind. This was a parent that was ready to sacrifice his all to save his child. Even though the odds were against him, Even though there was no hope whatsoever, he wasn't giving up. Gustav didn't know when he tightened his fist, causing it to make popping sounds as his entire arm vibrated. Now mind you, my boy, I'm not asking you to become a hero. Becoming a hero in this vast world is not only useless, but will also bring about your death. I'm only telling you not to turn a blind eye to something you know you can truly change. If you see a person as being inflicted with the same pain you went through, and you have the ability to put an end to it, don't turn a blind eye. You don't have to be a hero, but being numb to wicked deeds and the likes of those who are a nuisance to the community makes you no different from the people you hate. Boss Danzo's words kept reverberating in Gustav's mind as he watched the father of those kids being struck down again and again and again. The other neighbors in the vicinity also watched this cruel deed from their positions, but there was nothing they could do about it. Can you determine their power levels? Gustav suddenly asked the system. Why? The system asked with a suspicious tone. Just do it, Gustav commanded. All right. The leader is at the falcon rank while the others are ranged in between Gilbert to Marshal. The gigantic one is peak Marshal like you, the system analyzed. Got it, Gustav stated as he noted all 20 of them analyzing them with god eyes as well. Gustav proceeded to bring out a fox-like mask from his storage device and put it on. To avoid them calling for backup, I need to end them as quickly as possible, Gustav muttered as he closed his eyes. The instant he opened his eyes back, a pinkish flame appeared within it. The leader in front was about to kick the man away again when he suddenly sensed something and turned around to face the building Gustav was in. In the next moment, a wave of pinkish energy spread forth, covering the entire vicinity. Plop, 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 plop. Every single person within the troop fell to their knees as it made contact with them, the leader included. What in the world is this PWR? He voiced out while staring through his helmet, trying to look for the enemy. He and every other person in the troop were struggling to regain control of their bodies. Whoosh! In the next moment, a white silhouette flashed by. Sheehan, a loud blade-like sound rang out, and before everyone could understand what was happening, heads began to fall. Chapter 5:25. Plop, plop, plop. The leader struggled to move his body as he saw this silhouette dash from place to place with a milky glowing dagger in its grasp and a weird-looking fox-like mask. His men couldn't even scream as they had lost control of their bodies. Helmets dropped one after the other with heads within them as fountains of blood kept jetting out of the headless bodies. Gustav arrived in front of the bulky guy who was lifting the teenage girl and stabbed him right in the left shoulder, severing his arm from his body before pulling the girl from his grip. Swoosh! He dashed towards the front and dropped the girl beside her siblings. The girl kept vomiting after witnessing the cruel scene in front, while her little brothers had covered their eyes. Gustav reached out to the father next and picked him up. Take this. He handed him a medicinal pill, which the man put in his mouth, causing his injuries to quickly begin healing. Take your family away from here. Gustav's voice sounded extremely deep and powerful, different from his usual voice. Thank you, thank you. The man appreciated as he quickly moved towards his kids and hurried them away from the scene. Swoosh! He dashed back once again towards the rest who were still on their knees. Only about 7 of them were left. I have about 10 seconds more, Gustav said internally as he dashed towards the rest, activating sprint. Sprint has been activated. The troops could only hear the sounds of whooshing air, and the next thing they knew, a whitish blur had phased past them. It was so fast that they could see their vision turning upside down as their head fell to the floor before everything turned black completely. In 5 seconds, Gustav had murdered almost everyone, and at this point, 2 of them were left. The leader and the one gigantic one who used the cannon-like gun the other time. Just as Gustav dashed towards them, a massive wall suddenly ascended from the ground and surrounded both of them. Gustav kept dashing forward and swung his blade once, causing the entire thing to be destroyed in one swing. But the instant he did that, a mighty spear-like light was already headed towards him from the front. It had appeared right before him that dodging seemed impossible. Gravitational displacement has been activated. The force of gravity around him suddenly turned weird as the spear of light moved slightly towards the side while Gustav also swerved at full force. Swihai! The spear grazed his left shoulder, drawing a line on the surface that caused a drop of blood to roll down his sleeves. Fwowish! Gustav arrived about 100 feet towards the side as he took in a deep breath. He had managed to escape that, but now the 5 seconds left were up. Both men instantly jumped to their feet the moment they regained control of their bodies. She and multiple rays of light suddenly converged around him, forming hundreds of spears barely, which he sent hurling towards Gustav. The gigantic one pulled the vest from his body and tore his upper clothes before revealing his muscular upper body. Grhhh. He growled out as he increased in size, becoming about 11 feet in height, looking like a colossal being. Thump, 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 thump. His footsteps echoed as every step brought tremors to the vicinity. Gustav was currently dodging the light spears and slashing forward at those he couldn't dodge. The instant he managed to swerve forward, dodging all the projectiles that had destroyed a large portion of the street behind him, the colossal-looking guy was already leaping towards him from above. Gustav quickly rolled towards the side, dodging the descent as the gigantic guy slammed into the ground, causing a massive wave of destruction to spread across the place. The moment Gustav arrived on the other side, the leader was already stabbing towards his chest with a light spear in his grasp. Gustav moved to the right and spun around quickly, sending his atomic blade towards the neck of the leader. Swish, the leader quickly pulled back his spear and spun it around, hitting Gustav's right hand away, and proceeded to send a punch towards Gustav's chest. Gustav leaned backward, dodging the punch, but just as his body was lowered, the colossal dude was pounding towards his head from behind with his two massive fists that were coated in rocky covering. Gustav's eyes slightly widened as he placed both hands on the ground after descending to a certain height and throwing his body upwards using his hand. Fwy! Gustav turned his body towards the side as he ascended in the air, slipping in between the space of the colossal sky left and right hand. Gustav flew above his head and threw out a punch and sliced towards his back. Swyive rocks appeared on the colossal guy's back as Gustav's atomic blade sliced across it from his neck down to his spine area. Due to this, he had managed to avoid getting killed instantly as the blade only managed to cut 3 inches deep into his back after breaking through the rocky barrier he set up. He was blasted forward as Gustav arrived behind, ready to parry the attack of the leader again. "Who are you?" the leader asked as Gustav dodged his strike once again. "That doesn't matter because you will be dead soon," Gustav responded while sending out a strike once again the leader was able to block. "Haha, I've just been going easy on you. I have no idea what you did before, but I'm sure you can't do it again. Now I will stop being holding back," he voiced out as a blinding light suddenly burst forth from his figure, pushing Gustav back. Meanwhile, the colossal dude had stabilized himself behind, ready to jump into the fight again. "You're wrong," Gustav muttered as his eyes suddenly emitted a fiery pink glow. Phew! Pinkish energy suddenly blasted forth from his body, surrounding the entire vicinity. Plop, plop. Both of them fell to their knees again with shocked looks as Gustav dashed forward while tightening his grip around the atomic blade. Check out my new story, Chronicles of Azeroth. Add it to your library, vote, and comment. If up to 1,000 people add it to their library before next weekend, they'll do a 5 chapters mass release for the Bloodline system. Thank you all. Chapter 5:26. Plop, plop. Both of them fell to their knees again with shocked looks as Gustav dashed forward while tightening his grip around the atomic blade. Combination has been activated. Sprint plus dash, Swii. His speed was like a blur to them as he zigzagged across the place, and before they both realized it, they saw their vision tilting. So this how it ends? This was the thought on both their minds just before their vision blacked out. Plop, plop. 2 heads and headless bodies fell to the ground completely with blood jetting out as Gustav appeared on the far end of the street as the atomic blade in his grasp slowly began to disappear while the blood surrounding it disintegrated into thin air as well. He retrieved his Yarki to save energy before walking towards the headless body of both Sir Lucius and the other gigantic mixed blood. If this was 7 months ago, Gustav wouldn't be able to use Yarki twice, but now he had devised a way to use it without using up the energy completely. Right now, he could use it thrice in a day, as long as he targeted a particular range that he wanted to be affected. If he wanted to use it on a larger scale than this, he would have run out of energy completely. He quickly moved towards the spot where the head of the leader, Sir Lucius, fell and picked it up. Gustav removed the helmet, revealing the face of Sir Lucius to be a fairly handsome guy who looked no older than 30 with a scruffy black beard and braided hair. Noting the looks, Gustav started bringing all bodies of the group towards the interior area of where the broken-down house was. At this point, citizens in the area were peeping out their windows, and some even came out after witnessing what had just happened. They all wondered who this person with the fox mask was. After piling the bodies, Gustav moved towards the side of where the wall of the house used to be located. His body transformed a little, turning greenish as he bloated just before he proceeded to crouch and touch the ground. ZZZRRGGHH. 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 Icicle-like walls shot out from the ground and started forming a barricade around the area, turning into a small household in a few seconds. The place became covered up, and the neighbors outside could no longer see what was going on inside. Gustav quickly took the clothes of Sir Lucius off along with the helmet and kept it in his storage ring along with his communication device. Gustav proceeded to bring out a small button-sized silver-colored device. Beep. Tapping on it, he activated it and dropped it within the barricaded surrounding before starting to move towards the small opening he left above. Tom. Gustav jumped upwards, phasing through the small opening above, and proceeded to block that as well before jumping off. In the next few seconds, boom, a loud blast rang out within the barricade, causing it to vibrate intensely. The citizens in the vicinity saw a small hole blasted within the wall on the barricade Gustav set, and all they could see was smoke. Gustav had incinerated the bodies within. As Gustav moved away from there, dashing towards another region, he allowed the barricade he set to collapse. When it did, all that could be seen where the corpses initially were was only a patch of black. Everything solid within had been completely disintegrated. Dash, just who was the fox-masked man? Dash, is he on our side? Dash, who cares what side he is on? He saved that family. The people in the vicinity said amongst themselves. Gustav found a place to hide out a few minutes later and changed his outfit. Underground a small, nearly ruined building, Gustav was dressed in a black outfit holding a helmet. His face slowly morphed into that of Sir Lucius as he brought out the small communication device in his storage, which was currently ringing. It was a rectangular device that displayed the name of the person currently trying to communicate. Commander Fabian, this was the name displayed there, and from what Gustav remembered, this person should be higher up the ropes than this Sir Lucius. Gustav pressed his neck area as he coughed twice. His voice suddenly started changing, turning a little raspy before becoming deep and strong. This was the same way Sir Lucius sounded. He brought out some red liquid he stored within his storage ring and wiped it all over his face. Gustav finally answered the call a moment later. Lucius, where have you been? My goodness, what happened to you? A portrait-sized projection of a square-shaped face, middle-aged man with sharp eyes appeared in his line of sight. He noticed the blood smeared all over Lucius' face, which caused him to speak that way. There was a situation. All my men are down. We were attacked by unknown forces at the 21st region. Gustav reported with speed using Lucius' identity. What? Which group was responsible for this? The man in the projection asked with a look of fury. I'm still investigating that, which is why I was not able to respond in time. They had advanced weaponry just like us and came prepared to battle with 5 times the amount of men I had with me. Gustav kept giving a fake report. Do you need backup? He asked. They are no longer in sight, but I am tailing some of their forces at the moment, so I might not show up for a while, Gustav answered. Is he also selling weapons to our enemies as well? That bastard. Gustav caught this statement and stared at Commander Fabian with a suspicious gaze. He wanted to ask who Commander Fabian was referring to, but that would blow his cover since Lucius was supposed to know who this person is. It's most likely that he is doing just that. Is there any way we can get to him and propose a deal so he stays clear off the enemy? Gustav asked. Chapter 5:27. Good idea. He last mentioned he was heading to Region 32. That greedy bastard is probably hiding somewhere. They're selling these weapons to the highest bidder. I'll send some troops there to make him an offer he cannot refuse using my name. Commander Fabian stated with a smile. You're still as smart as ever, Lucius, he added. Gustav bowed his head slightly in respect. I have to go now, Commander. I don't want to lose the enemy's trail, he voiced out. Ah yes, be careful. I was expecting some beautiful girl today, but I understand the situation now. I'll make do with the ones I have here. A sadistic grin appeared on Commander Fabian's face before the communication was cut. Gustav's face turned a little dark after that as he slowly transformed back into his normal look. What do you think? The system asked from within. I can't jump into conclusions just like that. It's a battlefield, so there will definitely be more than one arms dealer. However, this is our first and only lead, so I might as well follow this one for now, Gustav analyzed. They were currently in Region 13, which was where the whole incident with the group went down. This easy victory was mostly achieved due to his use of Yarki, which he couldn't rely on again till it recharged completely. Also, he now knew that there were mixed bloods who could still activate their bloodline's abilities while under the hold of Yarki. This was something Gustav didn't expect, and now he knew his Yarki still wasn't powerful enough. His conversation with Commander Fabian was done to mislead them, which was why he mentioned Region 21. If Commander Fabian was going to send troops to check on Lucius, they would be sent to an entirely different location. So he believed that for the time being, the kids and their father would be safe. Gustav didn't plan to remain in this getup. He couldn't continue playing Lucius since he hardly knew anything about him. If he had adequate information about Lucius, he would have penetrated the Zalabin's clique using Lucius' identity. Still, if he decided to try it now, he would only be putting himself in harm's way since many things could blow his cover. He was just glad to have received a new lead. Region 32 is up to 1,500 miles away. You won't get there till evening, the system stated. It wasn't even mentioned among the suspected regions Sahil might be hiding. I guess the best way of figuring this out would be being a part of the fighting force. That way I would be able to gather information on where the arms are coming from, Gustav mumbled while taking off his clothes. He was currently changing back into his tattered-looking wear and putting Lucius' clothes into his storage device. Most of these weapons were being used majorly because the troops in battle were very weak. Besides people like Lucian and the other gigantic guy Gustav fought before this, most of the other mixed bloods were below the martial rank, and some of them had not even surpassed the Zulu rank. This was one of the reasons Gustav was asked to stay out of battle. Those who had reached his strength level would be considered big shots, so he could attract the attention of the battling forces here, which could end up blowing his cover. It was currently almost 12 noon, right now. Even though Gustav was very fast, it still took him at least 3 hours to travel a distance of close to 2,000 miles unless he went at full speed and used combination in the process. This would cause him to expend a lot of energy points, and he wouldn't want that to happen since he needed to save as much energy as possible. Using a fairly moderate pace would make him spend a long time traveling, but he would be able to save energy, and he also wouldn't attract too much attention to himself. After changing, Gustav decided to begin his journey. Dashing across the streets, he saw more and more demolished buildings devastated by the war. ZZZHHHHHZZZHHH. After about 2 hours of traveling, Gustav found himself blitzing across a battlefield. Boom, 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 boom. Explosions occasionally went off across the surroundings as troops from opposite sides kept firing different types of artillery. Thump. Gustav leaped upwards and landed on a 9-story building by the side. The position he leaped from erupted in flames a moment later as a projectile slammed into it. Gustav could sense up to 400 forces scattered across the place with his perception. Bodies were dropping every second, and even citizens living in this particular area kept running from place to place, trying to escape. Gustav could see a massive crowd of no less than 100 headed towards the southwest area of this region of the city. Shrieks and cries filled the place as the crowd moved forward like their lives depended on it because it did. Gustav dashed forward and leaped forward away from the building he was currently standing on. As his body traveled across the air, boom, the building he had just leaped from exploded into smithereens, causing debris to be scattered all across the place. Bam! Gustav landed on the ground and dashed forward once again, dodging projectiles sent at him since, at this point, no one knew who the enemy was. They were random shots all across the place. Gustav initially didn't want to pass this region when he found out that a battle was happening here, but if he decided to go around it, his journeying time would go up by almost 2 hours. His goal was to arrive at Region 32, latest by 6, so he would have enough time to observe and go around the region before finding somewhere to hide out for the night. Right now, he had to scale through all this madness and ignore the cries of the citizens trampling upon each other in a bid to escape this region. Chapter 528. Right now, he had to scale through all this madness and ignore the cries of the citizens trampling upon each other in a bid to escape this region. Swoosh! Gustav activated dash and moved forward with speed, swerving all across the place and leaping upwards to avoid the troops on the other side. He suddenly noticed a massive mechanical piece of equipment structured to look like a panther towards the southeast side. It was robust and about 10 feet tall, with lots of weaponry stationed on its being. Fwhoop, 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 it suddenly shot out some missile-like projectiles. As Gustav dashed forward, he noticed that 4 of these missile-like projectiles were headed toward the escaping citizens. He suddenly paused his footsteps and slid forward before leaping towards the top of a tall tree by the side. The instant he landed on a branch at the top of the tree, he was catapulted upwards with force due to the elasticity of the branch. Ascending up to 1,000 feet in the air, Gustav's head transformed into that of the serpentine mixed breed with black scales and ram horns protruded out of his face. Fwoo! A purplish beam shot out of his mouth, traveling towards the missile-like projectiles. Gustav turned his head to the side while in midair to control the beam as it blasted across the sky, destroying all 3 missiles in one fell swoop. Boom! 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 It exploded in the air above the crowd escaping away. The force of the blast swept across the area, causing lots of people to be sent flying as it carried a lot of wind. Luckily, no one was harmed. Gustav landed back on the ground a few seconds later and found himself surrounded. Ting, 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 ting. A group of 10 men clad in red tight bodysuits and tight black armor on several parts of their bodies with a weird-looking black helmet had found their way to the top of the building Gustav leaped up from the other time. They all had weapons pointed at Gustav. "Which side are you on?" one of them voiced out as they powered their weapons. "Our side or the Lanzi's group?" the person who seemed to be the leader of the squad voiced out. "None." The instant Gustav voiced this out, Super Jump has been activated. Thumb. He leaped forward with intensity, causing a blast to spread across the place as the top of the building gave way. Kyre! Screams rang out as all 4 of them fell through the top of the building, while the entire building still kept vibrating and cracks continued to spread across the place. The dust had also filled the entire rooftop at the moment. Still, Gustav's body was currently traveling across the air with speed. Luckily, he was currently using the face of another person. So even if they had seen his face, he could change his look later on. His body started to descend after he had crossed more than 3,000 feet in the air as he flew for a few more hundred feet before landing up ahead. At this point, he could only see a few troops on this side, and they were all running forward to the location where the battle was directly ongoing. Gustav kept dashing forward till he was finally out of this region. It had expended him some energy going through all that, but he felt it was worth it as a notification popped up in his line of sight. Hidden quest complete. Save at least 10 citizens of Lialuk City today. Rewards, plus 20 attributes points, plus 200,000 EXP. New skill unlocked. Hover, finally, a new skill. What does this one do? Hover. Maybe it has something to do with flight. Gustav decided to check on the information regarding hover. Hover. Ability to make self or other objects float for a period of 6 seconds in mid-air. Just as I thought. This is quite a convenient skill, Gustav said internally while a smirk appeared on his face. At this time, it was already evening period. Gustav still had about 2.5 more hours of traveling time before he reached his destination. The aircraft he was being transported in was attacked. In a small space that looked like a military base, a man in MBO uniform could be seen giving a report to a 57-tall lady with ash-colored hair. Have they figured out who orchestrated the attack? The lady asked with a vicious-looking glare. It was traced to the Al-Hida base camping in the Sahara Desert. However, when forces were sent there, the enemies were nowhere to be found. The man explained gently, not trying to piss the lady off by any means. Incompetent fools. Why does the MBO keep degrading every day? She voiced out with a cold and annoyed tone. The other officers in the vicinity did not dare say a word even though they were being insulted. They just kept their mouths shut and focused on whatever they were doing. Give me the location. I'll take care of it myself, she commanded. But young miss, they're already gone. It would be a waste of time. The male officer tried reasoning with her. Give me the location now, she stated with a strong tone that left no room for arguments. The officer had no choice but to comply and voiced out the coordinates before passing a GPS to Miss Amy. Twi-yi, in a blink of an eye, Miss Amy suddenly disappeared from the military base. It looked like magic to them, and they didn't sense the force from the speed till after 3 seconds had gone by. Fwy. The breeze suddenly blasted forth across the place, causing some pieces of equipment to be sent flying along with the walls vibrating. Initially standing in front, the officer was lucky to have braced himself for this, so he was safe laying on the ground. Phew, that was scary. I never want to be the one to talk to her again, he muttered with a relieved look. Chapter 529. Miss Amy was currently soaring through the clouds faster than the speed of sound with a GPS in her hand. Her long coat flapped due to the wind as she checked the coordinates on the GPS before stopping in midair. Got it, she muttered as a purplish glow suddenly started appearing around her. A destructive aura spread across the vicinity as Miss Amy suddenly soared forward. Zuiziithan, her body instantly blitzed forward, disappearing from view as it seemed like she went through a vacuum of space, causing her body to turn inexistent for a few seconds. Thuruwam. In the next instant, she appeared about several thousand miles from her previous location. Still, she kept tearing across the sky with immense speed, causing the skies to be split. From below, a huge rift could be seen in tearing across the sky and repairing in the next few seconds. This caused scares all across cities and towns as half of the entire Earth witnessed this same scene. It only took Miss Amy a few seconds to travel halfway across the Earth as she appeared like a deity above the Sahara Desert. Phew, the winds howled as multiple tornadoes were formed due to her sudden stop. Miss Amy floated downwards in the middle of the endless yellow sands. The moment her legs made contact with the sand, she turned around to stare in the southwest direction with a smirk on her face. Gotcha. When the skies were nearly darkened completely, Gustav arrived at Region 32. Region 32 was quite different from what he had expected. This place wasn't riddled with destruction and war like the rest. Instead, it looked eye-pleasing and luxurious. Region 32 was literally a stronghold. It had barricades surrounding it, and a massive gate that prevented entry from people who weren't living in that part of the city. There were a lot of mansions and luxurious-looking buildings and households within. Lots of people were currently lining outside. They seemed to have been waiting for a long time, but weren't permitted entry into the region. The only things Gustav had seen going in and out of this place since his arrival here were luxurious-looking vehicles and convoys. Obviously, this region was for the rich and powerful who were not affected by the war. Gustav had no doubt that this place would remain safe till the end, because he could see the number of guards stationed at different parts and patrolling the place in large numbers. Many people had tried to force their way in or sneak in, but they were caught, beaten up, and thrown far away from the gate. This served as an example to others who decided to stay their lane in fear of receiving the same treatment. Some of them were okay with waiting here anyway because it was unlikely that any battle would occur here, so they felt safe even though they were standing outside. Gustav had made his way from place to place, starting conversations with people to know about the situation of the place, and these were the things he had figured out. He also found out that the poor people that weren't permitted to go in were given food every morning. Everyone here was coming from parts of the city that had been destroyed already, which was why the whole situation happened to be like this. Another piece of interesting information Guada found was that this region was being controlled by two groups, the Zalabans and the Lanzis. Gustav orchestrated a way to get in without being spotted. Many options came to mind as he slowly walked towards the gate. He waited till there was a convoy of vehicles approaching and brought out a button-sized device before placing it on his forehead. Cognitive concealment has been activated. His presence suddenly disappeared, and just as that happened, he tapped the button-like device he placed on his forehead. Zing! He instantly turned invisible. Nobody noticed this because he was within a crowd of people who moved towards the sides to avoid getting crushed by one of the incoming convoys of vehicles. Gustav, whose presence had disappeared along with his body outline, walked forward under the unsuspecting gaze of everyone and passed through the gate alongside the convoys. There were equipment that scanned everything coming in and going out of the region, which would uncover anything hidden. Gustav avoided leaping above the region gates because that would definitely cause some kind of attraction when his body made an impact with the ground after landing. So this happened to be the best way to get in without any suspicions. The technology scanning couldn't find him due to his cognitive concealment ability. The guards couldn't see him due to his invisibility. Walking through the gates, Gustav found a secluded place to go hide as he counted down. He quickly hid beside a building as the invisibility wore out and his body regained visibility. At this point, it was already nighttime, so Gustav could find a kind of secluded area to go change his clothes. He looked tattered and dirty, unlike how people living in this region would look, so he had to change into a standard outfit. He was glad he still had some of his clothes and quickly donned a red-colored jacket and black pants with fine-looking boots before getting a move on. The streets weren't completely empty, but they weren't completely filled either. Only a dozen of people could be seen moving around, and every single one of them looked well off compared to the people Gustav had met so far. Gustav's plan right now was to find somewhere to settle so he could make his next plans from there, and that would be his hideout place where he could always come back to after finishing with one investigation or the other. If he found himself in any form of trouble, this would also be where he'd come back to hide out instead of running around the region like a headless chicken. He sneakily checked for directions on the GPS he was given and picked a location in Region 32 to move to. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.